Chapter 1641. However, she seemed to have thought of something, and her smile froze on her face. If her son knew that she was using him, she wondered if he would cry. She rubbed her eyebrows as she had a headache. She was not immune to the boy's cries, so she was a little scared. No, she did not want to drag it on any longer. She did not want that person to affect her mood. She got up and walked out. That person was in the most pain, so he should take the antidote. As long as he took the antidote, he would agree to her conditions. Their engagement would be automatically cancelled, and she would be free again. Perhaps it was because he had used his telekinesis during the process of healing. Shinjioli's sword poison was unusually violent. He sat there, sweating profusely. His back was aching and itching, as if there were countless ants crawling in and out of it. It was a corrosive pain, 100 times more intense than normal pain. There was also an itch, a bone-deep itch. It made people want to tear off the skin there and throw it away to find the culprit behind the itch. Not only that, the blood in his body seemed to be boiling and converging into a stream of heat. It gathered somewhere in his lower abdomen, screaming for release. He did not move at all. He gritted his teeth and endured the pain. His clothes were soaked with sweat. Suddenly, there was a sound of hurried footsteps outside the courtyard. Someone had rushed into his small courtyard. He suddenly opened his eyes. Because of the pain, his eyes were slightly red. He looked like a handsome Azura. The severe pain and itch, as well as the indescribable desire, made him have an impulse to destroy it. At this moment, he wanted to kill anyone who intruded into his territory. He curled his fingers and was about to do something. Suddenly, he seemed to have heard something, and his face changed slightly. His fingers loosened. Bang! The door of his house was knocked open, and a small figure rushed in. Father! Shinjioli's fingers trembled. He subconsciously used a cleaning spell on himself to hide his embarrassment. He looked at the little guy who ran to the cloud bed. Nienma, what are you doing here? He subconsciously looked outside, but he did not see emotion. Nienma was panting as he ran. Without hesitation, he climbed onto Gu Shijio's bed. The cloud bed was taller than him, so he couldn't climb up for a while. Father, pull Nienma up. Gu Shijio hurriedly reached out her hand. In the end, Shinjioli couldn't bear to see his son working so hard. He pulled him up and held him in his arms. Where's your mother? Mother. Mother is still in the garden. Father, look, what is this? Shin Nienma finally let go of the thing that he had been holding in his little hand. It was a small green medicine bottle, and the bottle was stained with the little guy's sweat. Shinjioli's eyes narrowed slightly. He naturally recognized this. The antidote. Nienma, where did you get this? Shinjioli did not take the thing from his son. It's my mother's. She asked me to send it to you. Shin Nienma did not dare to admit that he stole it. Tell me the truth. Shinjioli's voice turned cold. How could the little guy lie to him at such a young age? Shin Nienma did not dare to lie anymore. He lowered his head and said, Mother was asleep, and I took it from her sleeve. He wanted to escape from his father's arms again. Father, quickly use it. I will apply it on you. Shinjioli held him tightly and did not let go. He looked at the little boy's red face because of running too fast. His face was very unpleasant. Chapter 1642. The distance from the garden to his courtyard was not close. It was at least 3 to 4 miles. If it were a celestial being, it would be easy to reach. However, for Shin Nienma, who was only a month old, it was a very long distance. He had to run for a while with his short legs. Until now, the little guy was still panting. However, the little guy's eyes were sparkling. He held the bottle in his hand as if it was a treasure. Father, please use it quickly. You don't look well. Is it painful? He lifted his sleeve and tried to wipe the cold sweat on his father's forehead. Father, Shinjuli felt suffocated. He felt sorry for his son's thoughtfulness and also for the woman's thoughtlessness. He had lived for so many years. What had he not seen before? What had he not seen before? How could Amo's little trick escape his eyes? That person even wanted to use a child. He took a deep breath and took the bottle from the child. Nienma, how is your recitation of the article on the response of the Tao that I taught you? Shen Nienma's forehead was dripping with sweat. He had forgotten to recite it. He was only concerned about his father today. Shinjioli looked at his guilty little face and put him down on the bed. Good boy, go back to the study room and memorize it. You are not allowed to come out if you are not familiar with it. If you are not familiar with it, my injury will be more painful. The last sentence was obviously a threat to the little guy. Moreover, he was relieved to see his father take the bottle. He immediately agreed, turned around, and ran away. Even when he reached the door, he was still worried, so he said, Father, you must use that medicine. Go. Shinjiuli waved at his son. Shen Nianma finally felt relieved and ran away. His little figure disappeared at the door. Shinjiuli looked at the bottle in his hand. He opened the cork and smelled it. He was a medical expert, so he could naturally smell that it was indeed the antidote. He slowly put the cork back on and slowly looked up. Come out. I know you are here. There was a flash of red light in the room, and Mo appeared. She raised her eyebrows and looked at him. You can see it. Shinjioli raised his hand and threw the bottle to her. I'm not stupid. Mo had no choice but to take the medicine bottle in his hand and look at him from head to toe. His face was unusually pale. Although he tried his best to endure it, and his face was calm and collected, he couldn't help but break out in cold sweat. It was obvious that his sword wound was still acting up. He used to be so powerful, but now, his face was pale and he was sweating profusely. He looked like a sickly beauty, as fragile as glass. Mo moved closer to him and tossed the bottle up and down in front of him. You're in a lot of pain, aren't you? In fact, as long as you use this medicine, you can immediately eliminate all the uncomfortable feelings. Why do you have to force yourself? You should know that without the antidote, your sword wounds will flare up more and more violently each time, and you will feel more and more uncomfortable. Nianma is worried about you, and I don't want the child to be worried about you. So, I let him steal the medicine and send it to you. Her voice was full of temptation, like Satan who was trying to lure Eve to eat the forbidden fruit. Her eyes fell on his lower body again. He was sitting there, and there was a strange shape on his robe. She smiled. Why do you have to endure it? You just have to give up. Before she could finish her sentence, a hand suddenly reached in front of her and grabbed her collar. Chapter 1643. In the next moment, there was a blur in front of her eyes as her entire body flew up and fell into his arms. His movements were too fast, so fast that Mo didn't even have time to react. Or perhaps she didn't even think that he would do this. By the time she reacted, she was already in his warm embrace. She was shocked and angry as she raised both her arms and slapped his chest. He actually dared to take advantage of her. With her current martial arts, no one could take advantage of her. She had used all of her strength when she raised her palms. If Shinjioli was hit by her, she was afraid that he would immediately fly out of the courtyard. But she had clearly underestimated Shinjioli's martial arts. As soon as her palms moved, they were caught by him. Taking advantage of the momentum, he locked them above her head and then flipped her over to press her down. His body was burning hot, but her body was slightly cold. The cold and the hot intertwined like the positive and negative poles of a magnet, tightly entwined together. Mo simply couldn't believe what was happening in front of her. She was actually being restrained by him while he was still heavily injured. She subconsciously wanted to use her magic, but as soon as her body moved, she was firmly pressed down by him. There was an inexplicable power in his body that enveloped her entire body, making it impossible for her to use her magic. Her hands were being restrained, so she steeled her heart and wanted to raise her leg to kick, but her legs were also being restrained by him, so she couldn't use any strength. His hot body pressed down on her body, making her heart beat wildly. His arms were tightly wrapped around her and there was a faint red light in his eyes. Actually, there is another kind of antidote. He reached out his finger and pressed it against her soft lips. Shuama, do you want to know what the other kind of antidote is? Shuama, he no longer called her Mo, but Shuama, this name seemed to have been lost for a long time. When he called out this name, it seemed to have a burning pain, making Mo's eyes suddenly turn dark. Shinjioli, this lord is not. She subconsciously wanted to deny this name, as if this name was a scourge that wanted to drag her into the abyss. However, before she could finish her explanation, his lips had already pressed down on hers. His fiery lips invaded her slightly cold lips. She suddenly widened her eyes and fiercely wanted to bite him, but his kiss was very skillful. She couldn't bite him at all. Instead, his lips and tongue invaded her mouth even more fiercely. His kiss was filled with a kind of violence and passion that she hadn't felt in a long time. It was as if he wanted to swallow her whole, making her almost unable to breathe. When Shinjioli first kissed her like this, it was actually more of a punishment than anything else. But once he hugged this body that he had been longing for day and night, his longing overwhelmed him and drowned him. Coupled with the effects of the medicine from the sword wound, now that he had her under his body, his desire burned like a raging fire. In this world, the only thing he wanted was her. The only thing he longed for was her. After searching for her for so long, he had missed her in his dreams and soul for so long. He longed for her so much that his soul ached. The moment he saw her for the first time, he wanted to hold her tightly in his arms to relieve the pain of missing her. However, he knew that that wouldn't do. He wanted to respect her, and he wanted to use his charm to get her back. He wanted to take it step by step and truly move her before making love with her. For the past month, when he was with her, he had been controlling himself again and again. He controlled his desire to hug her and kiss her. God knows how hard it was to see the person he loved in front of him, but he couldn't hug or kiss her. He never thought that she would actually challenge his bottom line again and again. Chapter 1644. However, he did not expect that she would challenge his bottom line again and again. She was indifferent to him and helped another man to hurt him. She even threw away his flowers. Even if she destroyed the flowers that could save his life, he could still forgive her and understand her. He also felt that he deserved it. However, he did not expect that she would send him another woman at this time. He also did not expect that she would use the child to trick him. If he could not guess the truth and used the drug to dissolve the engagement, what would the child think of him in the future? Nianma was a sensitive child. He would be traumatized for the rest of his life because of this. He was seriously injured. Perhaps his psychokinesis was not as strong as hers, but he had thousands of years of memory, while she only had 3 years of memory. Even if she was the devil master, she was still a rookie in front of him. Before she could make a move, he had already predicted it in advance. With a few moves, he had pinned her down and made her unable to move. His kiss was hot and raging on her lips. Under the entanglement of their tongues, Mo could feel the hardness and heat of a certain part of his body. At this point, Mo finally realized the disparity in strength between him and himself. She thought that she was already invincible in this world, but she did not expect that once she met him, she would still be restrained. Once she angered him, she would still be trapped by him. He kissed her as a punishment. The soft and delicate body in his arms made his heart tremble as if it was scalded. Images of the intimate moments with her flashed in his mind, and this image made his body as hard as iron. She used to be his wife, his lover, and the woman he loved for 3 lifetimes. Now, she was his fiancée. She was right under him, and he desperately needed redemption. Shouldn't all of this happen naturally? He panted heavily and desperately tried to control himself. At this moment, his emotions and rationality were in a tug-of-war. The look in his eyes changed dramatically. Apparently, he was in a fierce battle. Rip! He tore the front of her clothes. Her chest was cold, and the endless spring was revealed in front of his eyes. Shuema. His voice was gloomy and hoarse. It was as if this name was redemption, pain, and an indescribable sorrow. It caused Amo's heart to tremble as well. She could not push him away, so she could only accept it passively. This name also made her feel like crying. It was as if the owner of this name had once been a part of her life, a part of her memories. She closed her eyes slightly. Her eyelashes gradually moistened, and a drop of tear flowed down the corner of her eye. The teardrop finally woke up Shinjioli, who had almost fallen into oblivion. The moment he saw it, his body stiffened. He suddenly let go of his hand and rolled to the side. As soon as Aimo regained his freedom, he almost instinctively jumped off the cloud bed. Her mind was buzzing. She stood there and looked at her messy clothes. She couldn't help but feel ashamed and angry. She raised her hand and a red light shot towards Shinjioli. "You're courting death." Shinjioli had hurt the wound on his back when he was rolling. He was in so much pain that he wanted to die. He was sweating profusely and his vision was turning black. When Amo's red light came, he didn't dodge at all. Or rather, he didn't want to dodge at all. Her palm landed solidly on his chest, and the crisp sound of bones breaking rang out. His body trembled, and that pair of eyes fell directly on her body. They were clearly deep blue eyes, but they were as black as an abyss. Chapter 1645. He did not say a word. He just looked at her and then slowly closed his eyes. After Aimo hit him, she did not expect to hit him. She stood there in a daze. The way he looked at her made her heart sink. There seemed to be an inexplicable string in the depths of her heart. There was a suffocating pain in her heart. She wanted to turn around and leave after hitting him, but her feet seemed to be tied by something. She could not move for a while. "Shinjioli, this is a lesson for taking advantage of me." Her voice was full of hatred. He did not move. "Shinjioli, if it were not for Nienma, I would have killed you immediately." He still did not move. "Shinjioli, don't play dead. Let me tell you, it is useless to play dead. I will not fall for it." He closed his eyes and lay on the cloud bed without moving. There was blood at the corner of his lips. It was bright red. Who would be hurt by the sight? Mo's eyes darkened. She took a light breath and suddenly turned around to leave. She quickly walked out of the house where she almost lost her virginity. This person dared to take advantage of her. Even if she really killed him, he deserved it. He deserved to die. He deserved to die. He deserved to die. This sentence kept popping up in her mind, and her domineering aura leaked out. However, her footsteps were getting slower and slower. She did not know why, but when she thought of the words "he is dead," her heart felt like it was being stabbed by a knife. It was as if these words had hurt her and made her live a life worse than death. When she reached the door of the courtyard, she finally stopped. It was as if there was a lead ball tied to her feet. She could not move anymore. The wound on his back, the blood at the corner of his lips, and his eyes that were as deep as the abyss. She could not help but clench her fists tightly. If he really died here, just when she thought of this, she seemed to have noticed something. She looked up and narrowed her eyes slightly. Shen Nianma's small body emerged from the other side of the road and was running in this direction. Although his two calves were short, he was not slow at all. He was probably using all his strength. He was indeed a smart child. He had finished the homework that his father had given him in such a short time. He had memorized the article on the response of the Tao by heart. He had come here to show off to his father and take a look at his father's injuries to see if he had recovered. Just as he ran to the door, a red figure suddenly blocked his way. He was shocked and couldn't stop in time, so he crashed into the arms of the red-clothed man. He shook his head and looked up in confusion. Then, he shrunk back. Mother. He felt a little guilty. Mo looked down at him, her face expressionless. Little brat, why are you running? Mother, Nianma is here to see father. After he finished his sentence, he was a little surprised. Mother, why are you here? He suddenly thought of something and his eyes lit up. Mother, you're also worried about father, so you came to see him, right? You're willing to treat him. His eyes were full of pure joy. His little face smiled like a flower, which made Mo's heart ache again. She took a light breath and patted Nianma's head. Well, I have to see your father and treat him. I can't disturb you. You go play in the garden first. I will find you later. Okay. Shen Nianma did not suspect anything. He pulled Mo's sleeve again. Mother, you must treat father. Father will be very happy. Chapter 1646. Don't be long-winded. Go. Shen Nianma was afraid that his mother would regret, so he turned and ran away. He ran faster than he came. Mo stood at the door of the courtyard and watched him run away. She was slightly relieved. Fortunately, the child did not see it. Forget it. For the sake of the child, she would save him this time. She would talk about breaking off the engagement later. She finally found a reason to save him. She turned and ran back. Shinjioli was still unconscious and did not move. Mo went forward to check his injuries. Her heart skipped a beat. Thanks to her palm strike, 4 of his ribs were broken, and one of them had almost pierced his heart. The sword wound on his back showed signs of enlargement. It looked even more ferocious. In addition to these 2 places, there were some scars on his body. There were claw marks, teeth wounds, burns. All kinds of injuries were stacked on his body. It was a frightening sight. Wasn't this person extremely powerful? How could he have so many injuries? She remembered that there were no scars on his body. His skin was flawless like jade. Her fingers that were checking on him suddenly paused. No, she did not want to remember him. She should not remember anything about him. She did not want to remember. A red light flashed in Mo's palm. She gently hit her forehead to erase all the memories that should not and did not want to appear. There were 2 injuries that made him unconscious. One was on his back, and the other was on his chest. It seemed that these 2 injuries had something to do with her. Mo pursed her lips. She tore open his robe and fixed the broken ribs on his chest. She was very skilled in the way she fixed the ribs. She was so familiar with it that even she was stunned. She knew that it must be a skill that she learned 3 years ago before she went through the ordeal. She was too lazy to think about it. She was the Devil Master. Although she did not have the memory of her previous life, she knew that she had lived for more than 10,000 years. She did not know how many things she had experienced in these 10,000 years. Her life before the ordeal was at most a few decades. Compared to her life of tens of thousands of years, a few decades was just a drop in the ocean. Why should she care about those decades? Why should she remember? What she wanted was the present. She lived for the present. She was the demon lord of the demonic immortal continent. As for everything else, they were nothing but fleeting clouds. The powerful surgeon's bone-setting technique, coupled with her special treatment method as the Devil Master, had healed his chest. She believed that when he woke up and used his self-healing method, he should be able to recover very quickly. As for the back, Mo looked at the hideous wound on his back and was slightly lost in thought. If she treated him now, she was afraid that she wouldn't be able to find a way to force him to break off the engagement. This person was so strong and had an unusual obsession with her, which gave her an unusual headache. Needless to say, the Shuama he mentioned was the name of the person she had transformed into before she went through the calamity. That person might not be the real her, but her incarnation. She felt that when he called her Shuema, even though she was in his eyes, his heart was filled with that incarnation. It was like an actress who played the role of a heartthrob and made everyone fall head over heels for her. But that person was only infatuated with the character in the movie, not the real her. Nyenma. Was little Nyenmo really the child she had when she was incarnated? But wasn't the child gone? Even though Imo had deliberately sealed that memory. Chapter 1647. Although Imo had deliberately sealed that memory, she still had a fragmentary impression of the loss of the child. It seemed that she had witnessed the moment of the miscarriage with her own eyes. This was the plot that she did not want to remember the most, but it was also the one that left the deepest impression on her. Even if she could not remember the specific situation, she subconsciously knew that the child was gone. Although she did not know what happened between the incarnation and Shinjioli, the only thing she was sure of was that the memory was extremely unpleasant. It was extremely tragic. It was so tragic that when she just woke up from her ordeal, she forcibly used the most powerful spell to seal the memory. It was not easy to use the spell, and she even had to pay a price. Since she had tried her best to erase the memory at that time, there was no need for her to remember it now. She would only torture herself. Nyenma, do you miss Shuema? Ha! Unfortunately, that person was gone. Shuema would no longer exist in this world. Therefore, whether it was his search or his repentance, it was destined to be in vain. Now, she would not be fooled by him and plunge into his gentle trap again. She gathered her messy emotions and thought for a moment. Since she had promised Nyenma that she would heal him, she could not break her promise. She especially could not break her promise to a child. She was really afraid of Shin Nyenma's disappointed eyes. Shinjioli, you should thank God for giving you a good son. She murmured. Finally, she took out the antidote bottle and poured the antidote on his back. The unique antidote naturally had an immediate effect on the injury. After the medicine was applied, the injury no longer worsened. It even showed signs of recovery. After everything was done, she breathed a sigh of relief and got up. She did not want to stay for a moment longer and strode out. Not long after she walked out of the courtyard, she received a report from General Manager Himu. Devil Master, we have just received a call for help from the Monster Kingdom. It said that a mysterious person has recently arrived in the Monster Kingdom and assassinated the Monster King. The Monster King's wife has asked for help from the Devil Kingdom. Would you like to go and have a look? Imo frowned slightly. The Demon Realm and the Demon Realm were originally of the same breath and branch. That Demon King was still extremely respectful to her and was already considered her subordinate. Since he was killed, she naturally had to go and take a look. She wanted to see who the mysterious person was that he dared to behave so atrociously in her territory. When she was about to get up, she suddenly remembered that little Nyenma was still waiting for her in the garden. She paused for a moment. On second thought, Shinjioli should be awake soon, and he would naturally take care of the child. Moreover, this was her Mo palace, which was heavily guarded. Even if there was no one to take care of little Nyenma, nothing would happen to him. When she thought of this, she gave a few orders to head steward Himu and immediately flew out of Mo palace. Shinjioli was awakened by an intense itch. It was as if countless ants were desperately drilling into his flesh, causing him to break out in a cold sweat the moment he woke up. In his daze, he subconsciously wanted to scratch, but fortunately, his willpower was extremely strong. He woke up in time and controlled his hand. When he opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was the wound on his chest. It seemed that someone had treated it. Before he fainted, he naturally understood the situation of the wound on his chest. Now, he could feel that his wound had been healed, and the broken bones were neatly connected. Chapter 1648. His heart skipped a beat. He placed his hand on his chest and closed his eyes, as if he was sensing something. After a while, he opened his eyes and a light flashed across his eyes. It was her. She had taken care of it for him. It seemed like she still regretted her actions after slapping him, so she decided to treat him again. It seemed that she was not completely heartless towards him. Had he finally moved her a little? His heart was like a tidal wave. He took a light breath and could not help but look around. The room was very quiet. The afterglow of the setting sun shone on the window lattice. It was slightly red and warm. The itch on his back was getting worse. He could no longer ignore it. He gritted his teeth and conjured a water mirror. The water mirror reflected his entire back and the wound. Then he was stunned. The wound was showing signs of healing. It did not look so hideous anymore. Was this heart-piercing itch a sign that it was healing quickly? However, the itch was so bad that it did not feel like it was healing. His heart skipped a beat. He reached out and touched the wound. Then he took a sniff. There was a faint smell of the antidote. Did she use the antidote for him? She did not add any conditions. Shinjuli's eyes were already sparkling. He even forgot about the strange itch on his back. He slowly got up and smiled with his hand on his forehead. He had clearly just been beaten up, and it wasn't a light one at that, but it was as if a bright day had finally come. He stood up. After being tossed around for so long, his body was still a little weak. When he stood up, his body actually swayed a little. He held onto the corner of the table with one hand and waited for the sudden dizziness to pass. Fortunately, the dizziness came and went quickly. After the dizziness disappeared, he realized that the itch on his back seemed to have lessened. Although it was still itchy, it was tolerable. This was already much better than before. He really wanted to see her. He guessed that she would still not give him a good look. But so what? After all, he was one step closer to her, wasn't he? The one thing he did not lack in his life was patience. He had the patience to wait for her. Wait for her to really change her mind. When he returned to this world, he didn't want to be a god anymore. He just wanted to stay by her side and live a peaceful life. No matter if she was Shui Emo, Ning Shuema, or the current Amo, the one he loved was always her. There had never been anyone else. He and she seemed to lack a bit of fate, and he couldn't predict the final outcome of the two of them. He didn't want to calculate anymore. He was a god, and no one in this world could really interfere with him. He believed that with his own strength, even if he had to fight, he would fight for fate. When she was Ning Shuema and Shui Emo, she loved him. Even if she became Amo and lost all her memories, she would still fall in love with him again. Only then would this love of 3 lifetimes be complete. Shuema, Amo. He chewed on the 2 names and a smile appeared on his lips. Recently, when this name flashed through his heart, it was often mixed with pain. At this moment, it also brought warmth. That warmth seemed to be ironed into his heart layer by layer. He closed his eyes and slightly adjusted his breathing. Perhaps it was because he had been tormented by that sword wound for too long. Now that he relaxed, he was especially tired. His body was extremely tired, but his mind was relaxed. Right now, she was probably in a state where she couldn't let go of her embarrassment and anger. It was better for him not to look for her, in case she felt embarrassed and said a few more unpleasant words to him. Chapter 1649. Gu Shijiu was probably in a state of anger and embarrassment. It was better for him not to look for her. He did not want her to embarrass herself and say something unpleasant to him. It was better for him to take a break and recover his energy. It would not be too late to see her the next day. Tomorrow. He should give her another kind of flower tomorrow. That kind of flower could only be found at night, and the guardian beast guarding the flower was particularly difficult to deal with. Therefore, he had to rest well. He fell into a deep sleep. Ever since he was injured by the Zhutian sword, he had not had a good night's sleep. Now, he could finally have a good night's sleep. He closed his eyes for a moment and went straight to hell. He originally planned to sleep for 2 hours, but he did not expect to have such a good sleep. When he woke up, it was already midnight. He hurriedly got up and walked out of the door. He looked at the stars outside and calculated the time. It was already early in the morning. After resting for a long time, he felt much better. The itchy feeling on his back had almost disappeared. If he did not pay attention, he would not be able to feel it. He looked at the flower in the courtyard again. It was indeed a very strong flower. In just half a day, it had already stretched out its branches and leaves. The slender and elegant flower swayed gently in the night wind, as if it was nodding to him in thanks. He breathed a sigh of relief and walked out of the courtyard. After thinking for a while, he waved his sleeve and covered the courtyard with a wizardry barrier. With this wizardry barrier, no one else could enter. Of course, the birds could not enter either. His precious flower, which he had painstakingly raised, would not be poisoned again. He stood outside Amo's bedroom. It was quiet, as usual. She must have fallen asleep with little Nienma in her arms. Speaking of which, he was a little envious of little Nienma. He could lie in her arms and ask for comfort, hugs, and even received countless kisses from her. Unlike him, he could not control himself and kissed her once. He even got slapped by her. In fact, in the past month, he often did not sleep in the middle of the night like today. He stood in her courtyard for most of the night. Who was it that stood in the middle of the night? That was probably the true portrayal of him, right? Although he couldn't hold her or touch her during those days, as long as he thought of her resting with his son in the palace, he would feel a sense of security in his heart. It was no longer as empty and terrifying as it was when he was busy running around the heavenly gift continent a month ago. He looked at the sleeping quarters with a calm gaze. Starlight flickered in his eyes, outlining his white robe, making his figure look exceptionally tall and steady. Shuama, no matter what, I will never let you go again. Please don't push me away again, or at least push me gently. The mother and daughter always breathed very lightly when they slept, and she was used to setting up a boundary outside her bedroom, so even if he was outside her palace, he couldn't hear their breathing. It was the same this time. Her palace was quiet and there was no movement. He stood outside the palace for a moment before flying away. He had to hurry up and pluck the flowers, or it would be too late. The demon palace had always been known for its extravagance. However, no matter how luxurious the palace was, it was no longer as luxurious as it used to be. Blood and corpses were everywhere, indicating that there had just been a massacre. When Amo arrived outside the palace, this was the scene he saw. There were broken limbs and broken bodies everywhere, and blood was everywhere. The scene made Amo's pupils shrink slightly. Chapter 1650. Beside her, head steward Homu clicked his tongue. What a vicious method. What a professional way of killing. This was simply a one-sided suppression. Who could this mysterious person be? Mo didn't say anything. She vaguely sensed a familiar aura in the air, as if this mysterious person was an old acquaintance of hers. There was no one outside the hall, but there were voices inside. The hall's doors were wide open, like a giant beast choosing its prey. A murderous aura emanated from the hall, causing the air to feel heavy. Head steward Homu volunteered. Devil Lord, let me go in and take a look. No need. The corner of Amo's lips curled up into a nonchalant smile. With a leap, he openly flew into the main hall. Head steward Homu was speechless. The Devil Lord was domineering and mighty. There were indeed quite a number of people in the hall. It seemed that all the leaders of the demon race had gathered here, forming a dense mass. Several demon corpses were strewn about in the middle of the hall, including the demon king, who had been split into two and was curled up in his original form. Beside him were his wife, concubines, and children. None of them were left alive, as they were all dead. Of course, around them were the corpses of more than 10 demon generals. These were the Demon King's loyal subordinates, who had sacrificed their last drop of blood to protect their master. As for the others, they were kneeling in the dust, bowing their heads to a man sitting on the main seat in the hall. The air was filled with the sweet smell of blood. The man sitting on the main seat was dressed in red, as if he had been dyed in blood. He had elegant features, and there was even a trace of a refined smile on his lips. He lazily looked at the people kneeling before him. "Who is your king now?" His voice was as magnetic as a cello, pleasant to the ear. Who would have thought that the owner of this voice was a demon who killed people like cutting grass? When he asked this question, the Demon King was still alive and under the protection of the guards. Now that he asked this question again, if they answered incorrectly, they would naturally die like the Demon King. The demon race had been in chaos these few years. Whoever had the hardest fist could become the Demon King. In just 100 years, the Demon King was like a crop of chives, cut and replaced. The current demon realm was just like the 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms. The Demon Kings changed frequently, even more frequently than women changed clothes. The Demon King that had just died had only been in power for 5 years. It was normal for him to be possessed by a newbie. Therefore, the leaders of the demon clan were very sensible. They immediately kowtowed and said, "Congratulations, Your Majesty, on becoming the Demon King." It was rare for the shouts to be so uniform. The red-clothed man pursed his lips and smiled. Just as he was about to open his mouth to say something, he suddenly saw a woman flying in from outside the hall. It was as if he had been struck by lightning. He abruptly stood up and blurted out, "Momo." Ah, Mo's red robes danced in the wind as he floated in the air. He looked down at the red-clothed man with an indecipherable expression. "You recognize me?" The red-robed man was naturally Shui Lan. He had succeeded in his tribulation, and when he woke up, he was already on this continent. The past was like smoke, passing through his mind. He finally remembered that he was once the strongest demon king in the world. He had once led the people of the demon realm to fight against the immortal realm, and killed the people of the immortal realm until they pissed their pants. If the immortal realm hadn't been defeated in the end and asked the supreme divinity to directly release his soul, perhaps he would have been able to expand the territory of the immortal realm for the demon realm. Chapter 1651. He sat at the place where he was reborn and felt like a lifetime had passed. He sat in the same place for 4 hours before he could sort out his thoughts. Supreme Divinity. Supreme Divinity. When he fought with the Supreme Divinity, he didn't even see her face. He didn't even hear her voice before she died under his sword. Now that he thought about it, he really couldn't accept it. The Supreme Divinity was the ruler of heaven and earth. She usually didn't meddle in other people's business. She didn't know why she attacked him that time. She really gave him face. After he was reborn, he naturally didn't want to be muddle-headed anymore. First, he tried every possible way to find out about the Supreme Divinity's whereabouts. Only then did he know that she had immortalized tens of thousands of years ago. Now, the ruler of this continent was a devil master called Amo. Shui Lan naturally knew about this devil master. Tens of thousands of years ago, when he was still a little demon, he had heard of her name. In the 6 realms, no matter which realm it was, they all believed in a spiritual leader. For example, the human realm, immortal realm, and ghost realm believed in the Supreme Divinity. The demon realm, devil realm, and beast realm believed in the devil master. The Supreme Divinity was an ancient god, so the devil master was naturally an ancient devil. These two wouldn't appear once in a few hundred years. They couldn't be more mysterious. Although Shui Lan had heard of the devil master, he had never seen her before. He only vaguely heard that she was a little girl who didn't grow up. Her name had the word Mo in it, but he didn't know anything else. Now that he was reborn and heard about this devil master, he had a strange feeling in his heart. He had a trace of suspicion about this devil master's identity. He really wanted to see this devil master, but the place where the devil master lived was not a place where he, who had no identity, could go. Besides, if the Devil Master was really the person he suspected, he also didn't want to see her without any status. Therefore, he thought about it and decided to enter the demon realm. The demon realm used to be his old territory. Although the demons here were no longer his subordinates and the demon realm had changed, he was still familiar with this place and the laws of the demon race. After his rebirth, not only did he regain his memories as the Monster King, but he also regained his kung fu. If he wanted to regain his position as the Monster King, he could only choose one path: kill. Just like the Monkey King of a group of monkeys, if a new monkey wanted to replace the old Monkey King, it would have to go through a bloody battle. Of course, the struggle for the throne of the demon race was much more complicated and troublesome than the struggle for the Monkey King. However, he couldn't stop himself from understanding the laws of the demon race. Whether it was sowing dissension or taking drastic measures to deal with the situation, he first used a series of methods in secret to make the original Demon King disloyal and disloyal. He also cultivated a group of followers for himself. When the time was right, he brought people in and caught the original Demon King off guard. Strength was the most important thing in the demon realm. As a Demon King, he naturally had some skills. According to the laws of the Yao clan, in order to take over the position of Yao King, one had to oust the original Yao King. Shui Lan naturally wanted to fight the Yao King alone. Unfortunately, Shui Lan's kung fu was too strong. The original Demon King wasn't his opponent at all and died under his sword. There was an unwritten rule in the demon realm. Once a new Demon King took over the position of Yao King, the first thing he had to do was to kill the original Demon King's family. To cut the grass, one had to remove the roots. This was also the law of the demon realm. Therefore, the original Demon King's family and the Demon King became ghosts under Shui Lan's sword. Shui Lan's kung fu and methods shocked all the generals of the demon race. The original Demon King's kung fu was so high that he couldn't even last 10 moves under his sword. Chapter 1652. Shui Lan's thunderous martial arts and methods shocked all the generals. The original Demon King's martial arts couldn't even last 10 moves under his sword. Naturally, these generals wouldn't be cannon fodder anymore. They immediately recognized Shui Lan as the new Demon King. Shui Lan originally wanted to visit the Demon Master in Mo Palace as the Demon King after inheriting the Demon King's position. He didn't expect her to come by herself. Moreover, this person was a miniature version of Ning Xuema. However, the aura around her was many times darker than Ning Xuema's. She really was Momo. His Momo really didn't die. However, from what she said, she didn't seem to remember him. She lost her memory. Shui Lan's eyes flashed with ecstasy. Losing her memory was good. Losing her memory was really good. As long as she lost her memory, she would forget everything about Shinjiuli. She would be like a new person. As long as he worked hard, he might be able to get her again. Instead of standing behind her and watching helplessly as she worried about another man's well-being and loss, about life and death, until now, he still couldn't forget her dying breath under that tree. He also couldn't forget her relieved expression when she went through the lightning tribulation. She used to work so hard to live. She used to work so hard to live a wonderful life. At that moment, she really wanted to die. Now, heaven really treated him well. It actually allowed him to meet her again after going through the tribulation. It was a brand new her. In this world, no one would fight with him anymore. Shinjiuli was still foolishly looking around the Tianxi continent. He didn't go through the tribulation, so he wouldn't come to this continent. He stood in place and raised his head to look at her. His gaze was gentle, and the smile on his lips was enchanting. He answered her question, "No, this is the first time we've met, respected Lord Devil Master." His tone was slightly raised, and his voice was magnetic and seductive, causing the demonesses in the hall to almost scream for him. Imo lowered her eyes to look at the man who was dressed in the same red robes as her. Dark waves swirled in her deep eyes as she spoke faintly, "No, you're lying." Shui Lan's heart sank. Did Momo recognize him? She didn't lose her memory. He didn't know if he should be happy or worried. Looking at her, he didn't know how to answer. It wasn't until now that he realized the difference between the devil master in front of him and the woman in his heart. She now had a pair of clear red eyes. Normally, demons would have a bit of red in their eyes, but that red was generally not pure. It could be black with red, or yellow with red. The more red there was, the higher the level of the demon, and the purer their skills. But Amo's eyes were pure red, without a trace of impurity. When it flowed slightly, it was as if there was a dark flame dancing in it. Shui Lan had never seen such pure and beautiful red eyes. When she stared at him, her eyes were strangely deep, as if they could suck in his soul. Now, she was looking at Shui Lan with such eyes. Looking at him, it was as if she wanted to look into the depths of his soul. Chapter 1653. Her tone was calm, but it gave people a soul-stirring feeling. It doesn't matter if you've known this lord before. Now that you've killed the king of the demon clan and become the new demon king, this lord will ask you, will you submit to this lord? She stood there. She was clearly short, but her powerful demonic aura made everyone tremble in fear. There were several hundred demons in the hall, but they were all suppressed by her aura. They didn't even dare to breathe loudly. Shui Lan was also somewhat suffocated by the powerful demonic aura emitted from her body. His heart was indescribably anxious. At this moment, he suddenly realized the gap between him and her. Although he was a powerful demon king, compared to an ancient demon, there was clearly a world of difference. When she fully released her demon master aura, the pressure of an ancient demon master made his knees go weak. He almost wanted to bow down in worship. In her previous life or the life before that, although their statuses were different, the difference between them wasn't too great. Even when she was Ning Shuima, he was still a little taller than her. He could restrain her and do whatever he wanted with her. But in this life, when he looked at her pair of extremely beautiful yet extremely deep eyes, he actually felt an instinctive sense of fear. She was the lord that the demon clan and the demon clan worshipped. She was high above. She was no longer the Momo that he thought was easy to approach. He was lost in thought for a moment. Imo didn't wait for his answer and became impatient. She slightly curled her fingers and her eyes became deeper. What? You don't want to submit? Her voice was almost cold. That powerful pressure caused all the demons in the hall to kneel down, trembling as they knelt there. Shui Lan, he silently swallowed the blood in his throat and finally knelt down. Of course I submit, my demon master, Imo finally smiled. It was a smile of conquest, but it was also a smile that was expected. With this smile, the powerful demonic pressure finally disappeared. It was like a spring breeze swept through the hearts of the demons. She looked at Shui Lan, her eyes filled with gentleness. Tell this lord your name. Shui Lan. Shui Lan replied in a deep voice. She smiled again and extended her small, snow-white hand towards him. Shui Lan, right? Very well, now you have to do something for me. By the time Imo brought Shui Lan back to Mo Palace, the sky was already starting to brighten. In the distance, the sky was showing the color of a duck's egg. The first rays of dawn had yet to fall, but the darkness was about to recede. Imo was in a good mood, and she believed that her mood would be even better tomorrow. She was most afraid of trouble and procrastination. She liked to do things in a straightforward manner. As long as she passed tomorrow, she believed that everything that was bothering her would end and she would return to the right path. Shui Lan, who was beside her, had an indescribable expression on her face ever since she found out about her plan. It was hard to tell whether she was crying or laughing. Imo waved his hand at his loyal subordinate, head steward Himu. All right, you can go and prepare. Then, she looked at Shui Lan and said in a gentle voice, you go and prepare too. Shui Lan, manager Himu had always been obedient to her. After bowing to Mo, he left with Shui Lan, who had an unfathomable expression on his face. Mo slowly returned to her own palace. The palace was as quiet as usual. She subconsciously looked at the bed. The bedding was neat and tidy, but there was no trace of Shen Yanma. Chapter 1654. She closed her eyes slightly and walked out again. In the blink of an eye, she appeared in front of the door of the courtyard next door. There was a wizardry barrier in the courtyard. It was not difficult for her to break the barrier, but if she wanted to break the barrier, she would definitely disturb the two people in the courtyard who were having a good sleep. There was no need for that. She would just let him have a good sleep. Mo returned to her bedroom. She casually pulled the quilt over her body and closed her eyes slightly. She was not used to not having the warm and soft little thing by her side. When she was half asleep, she hugged a pillow in her arms as if she was still hugging the little guy. She closed her eyes. She had to get used to it. She was an unlucky person. It was better for the little guy to stay away from her. That man was Shen Yanma's father. He would take good care of the little guy. The little guy was full of light aura. It was not suitable to stay by her side in the dark. She had been free for 3 years. She should not be tied down by anything. If he did not get close, he would not care. If he did not care, he would not be tied down. If he was not tied down, he would not be hurt. Recently, that person had messed up her mood from time to time. Now, it could finally end happily. That person seemed to be enduring the humiliation by her side, but in fact, he was extremely proud. When everything was revealed in front of him tomorrow, would he give up and leave? Would he? She closed her eyes slightly and thought of everything that would happen after dawn. She felt happy but also faintly twisted in her heart. The familiar lanterns and streamers were decorated, and the familiar red flowers were blooming everywhere. When Shinjioli returned to Mo Palace, he staggered slightly when he saw all the decorations in the side hall. He was not unfamiliar with such decorations. He had seen it thousands of times in his life. Mo Palace was holding a wedding. Naturally, he was not narcissistic enough to think that Mo would give him a surprise. She decorated the wedding hall to marry him. Moreover, the wedding hall did not conform to the standards of a real marriage for a real devil lord. It was more like a custom for a rich family to marry a concubine. He stopped in the air and looked down at everything with a pale face. His eyes were frighteningly deep. No one could guess what was on his mind at this time. General Manager Himu was the first to notice Shinjioli. He hurriedly flew over to greet him. Mr. Ever since Shinjioli moved in as the fiancé of the Devil Master, the Devil Clan had been addressing him as Mr. Shinjioli nodded slightly without saying anything. Manager Himu was also speechless. He thought that Shinjioli would angrily ask who was the organizer of the wedding. He thought that Shinjioli would ask him directly, but he didn't expect that Shinjioli would remain silent. This wasn't in line with the script they had rehearsed. Since he didn't ask, head steward Himu could only brace himself and answer, "Sir, the Devil Lord brought back an old friend yesterday. He fell in love with her at first sight and wants to take her as his concubine. Of course, if you don't mind, sir, after the Devil Lord marries that person today, he will have her serve you tea." Manager Himu said all this in one breath. Under Shinjioli's gaze, he felt a bit of pressure. In the devil realm, it was normal for a devil lord to have multiple wives and concubines. Some devil lords even had enormous harems. All the beautiful female devils of the demon race would have an affair with the devil lord and become his concubines. However, Mo was a devil lord who was countless ranks higher than a devil lord. It should be normal for her to have multiple wives and concubines, right? Since she was a woman, her harem would naturally be filled with men. Chapter 1655. Manager Himu felt that it was normal for the Devil Master to take in a concubine, not to mention that this was just a show. Head steward Heimu tried his best to make himself look calm and puff out his chest a little, so as to make this play seem more real. Manager Himu didn't dare to look directly at Shinjioli. This person's aura was too strong, making even a demon like him, who had been on the battlefield for a long time, feel anxious. He was waiting for Shinjioli to ask the name of that concubine so that he could say it openly. However, he didn't expect that Shinjioli would look down on him, giving Manager Himu the illusion that he was being looked down on by a god. His body couldn't help but stiffen. And Shinjioli's next words made him stiffen even more. Shinjioli only spat out 3 words. Shuilan. How did you know? Manager Himu blurted out. He was too shocked. The demon race could be said to have a network of information spread throughout the 6 realms. No matter what happened in any realm, the demon realm would always be the first to receive the news. He could only blame himself for Shui Lan's plan to counterattack in the demon realm, this time being too meticulous. Before the coup was launched, no one had noticed, and no one had even known of his existence. Manager Himu had only learned the name Shui Lan last night. How did this person know so quickly? This didn't make sense. Shinjioli didn't waste any more words with him. He only asked, "Where is she?" Manager Himu subconsciously replied, "In the main hall." Shinjioli's figure turned and disappeared. Manager Himu stood there with his mouth slightly agape, unable to react for a moment. Shinjioli's reaction was far beyond his expectations, so he didn't know whether he had succeeded or not. A moment after Shinjioli left, Manager Himu suddenly reacted. That's not right. This mister didn't fly out from the depths of Mo Palace, but flew in from outside. In other words, he didn't return last night. Mo Palace's main hall was decorated in a jubilant style. However, if one looked carefully, the main color here wasn't bright red, but more towards pink. Even Shui Lan's robes leaned towards pink. Shui Lan was extremely beautiful. At this moment, he didn't look frightening in his pink robes. Instead, it made his handsome face look rosy, giving him a different kind of beauty. Shui Lan's to look like this. He moves to mention to say, "Mo, do you have to do it like this?" Mo was still wearing her red dress. She looked at him and asked coldly, "Are you going back on your word?" Shui Lan felt a chill in his heart, and the smile on his face was somewhat stiff. I don't regret it. I just feel. God, why did it feel weird for him to wear such a pink robe and sit here? Tajuli Shui Lan never thought that he would have a day like this. Last night, when Shui Lan proposed this condition to him, being struck by lightning wasn't enough to describe his feelings. Although this concubine wasn't really a concubine and was just a show for others to see, as a supporting character, Shui Lan still felt like his 3 views had been ruined. However, when the Devil Masters might press down on him, he had no choice but to agree. Moreover, the Devil Master had promised him very generous conditions. As long as he successfully cooperated with her to complete this show and achieve the effect she wanted, she would allocate a large piece of land to the demonic beasts. She even said that she would give him 2 extremely beautiful demonic girls after the deed was done. Chapter 1656. He wasn't interested in the witch, but he was very interested in the land that was going to belong to the demons. Among the 6 realms, the immortal realm had the largest and best territory, followed by the devil realm. Next were the human realm and the beast realm. The demons were at the bottom of the heap, with the most barren land, even poorer than the poorest part of Africa. The demons had no choice but to disguise themselves as humans and run to the human realm to make a living. However, once they were recognized by the human realm sorcerers, they would be chased down and beaten, and killed by the sorcerers. Being able to own their own fertile land was the demons' most urgent wish. Of course, tens of thousands of years ago, when Shui Lan was the demon king, things weren't like this. At that time, the demons were still very popular under his leadership, and they could almost do whatever they wanted in the 6 realms. Blame it on that reverend god. After killing him, the demon king, the demon race declined year after year. By the time Shui Lan took over, the demon race had already turned into mud that couldn't stick to the wall, therefore, Mo's condition was simply a timely rain. Therefore, with all the above factors combined, Shui Lan gritted his teeth and agreed. The reborn Mo didn't say much, so Shui Lan didn't get much information from her. He only knew that she wanted him to act in front of someone, but she didn't say who that person was. She only wanted him to show off their affection at the appropriate time. She didn't say much else, so Shui Lan asked a few questions in a roundabout way, but he couldn't get anything out of her, so he simply stopped asking. Acting, he was good at it. He looked at Mo again, but saw that she was looking in a direction, slightly lost in thought. He didn't know what she was thinking, but there was a deathly stillness around her that made people not dare to talk to her. He looked at the lonely heaven character hanging in the middle of the wall and sighed softly. Even if he was taking in a concubine, this was too shabby. Just how perfunctory was Mo? There were a few dishes on the table, as well as a jug of wine and 2 wine glasses. The wine in the glasses was half warm. Mo and Shui Lan sat on either side of the table, each holding a glass of wine. Shui Lan expressed that he didn't quite understand the procedure of taking a concubine in the demon realm. Didn't taking a concubine need to bow to the heavens and earth? Taking a concubine only required one person to drink a cup of wine. Just as he was about to ask, the light at the door suddenly dimmed and a person slowly walked in. Shui Lan's mouth was a little dry from waiting. He picked up the glass of wine to moisten his throat, but the moment he saw the person clearly, the wine glass in his hand slipped and fell to the ground. Clang! An exceptionally clear and loud sound rang out. He couldn't care less about these things. He stood up abruptly and looked at the person who had just walked in. Shinjiuli. That person was naturally Shinjiuli. He stood at the door and looked at everything in the main hall. The sunlight inlaid a layer of silver on his back, but it made his face somewhat blurry. His gaze swept across the hall before finally landing on Mo. He didn't say anything and only looked at her calmly. It was as if a storm was gathering in the depths of his eyes, but his face was calm. Mo looked at him lazily. What are you doing here? She picked up the wine glass and twirled it around. There's no need to look at me like that. I'm just taking in a concubine. It's not a violation of our agreement. If you don't like it, there's no harm in. There's no harm in breaking off the engagement, is there? Shinjiuli continued. His voice was so steady that no fluctuations could be heard. Mo was choked by his straightforward reply and didn't say anything for a while. It was Shui Lan who reacted in time, a faint light flashing through his eyes. Chapter 1657. Shui Lan raised his hand to grab Mo's small hand and smiled at Shinjiuli. I didn't expect to meet you here. He didn't expect that the person Mo wanted him to put on an act for others to see was Shinjiuli. If he knew it was him, even if Mo didn't mention those conditions, he would have agreed. Shui Lan had suffered who knows how many times under Shinjiuli's hands. Now that he had this rare opportunity, he naturally wanted to abuse him. Mo is the devil master and I am the devil king. Devils and demons are one family. As long as this king can stay by Momo's side, it doesn't matter even if I'm a concubine. Shui Lan smiled flirtatiously and affectionately. He looked at Shinjiuli. Don't worry, this king won't steal your position as the first wife for Momo's sake. Of course, if you're tactful enough to withdraw from the marriage, then this king will fight for the position of the first wife. As he spoke, he pulled Mo in his direction. However, they were separated by a table, so he could only hold one hand. Shinjiuli's gaze fell on their intertwined hands. He narrowed his eyes and looked at Mo's face. His voice was still calm. In order to withdraw from the marriage with me, you're willing to ruin yourself like this? Mo's expression changed slightly, but Shui Lan was angry. He was a dignified devil king. Now that he was reduced to the devil master's concubine, he was the one who was ruined, alright? How could he say that Momo was ruined? He turned around and fluttered like a butterfly to Amo's side. He reached out to grab her slender waist and looked at Shinjuli provocatively. What do you mean ruined? Momo and I are in love with each other. If you didn't come between us, she and I would have been the most loving couple. Shinjuli, you're the one who made Momo so unhappy. If you know what's good for you, then withdraw from this marriage that doesn't belong to you and return to your immortal realm. Shinjuli's eyes fell on Shui Lan's arm again. His voice was cold as he said, Shui Lan, let her go if you don't want your arm to disappear. Shui Lan's expression changed slightly. He knew that Shinjuli was a man of his words. He wasn't just threatening him, but if she let him go after hearing his threat, how shameful would that be? While Shinjuli hesitated, Mo lifted her hand and pushed his arm away. She looked up at him, her voice cold and decisive. Shinjuli, I really hate you. I don't want to see you. Therefore, it's better for you to cancel this marriage as soon as possible. Her words were very merciless. Shui Lan stood to the side and felt a little embarrassed for Shinjuli. This supreme god had always been high and mighty. Who would have thought that there would be a day when he would be forced to cancel the marriage? Shui Lan looked at Shinjuli's snow-white face. While he was happy, he also felt a little sad. What if I don't withdraw? Shinjuli said in a low voice. His calm appearance seemed to hide a storm. Then I'll find all kinds of ways, including all kinds of ways to make it real. Mo also threw caution to the wind. Since things had developed to this point, she could only continue regardless of everything. Since the knife had already been cut, she had to cut off all the tangled knots. The atmosphere in the hall was unusually heavy. It was so oppressive that it made people want to scream. Shinjuli's gaze focused on Amo's face. After pausing for a moment, he finally said word by word, okay, I'll cancel the marriage. She didn't expect him to agree so easily. Chapter 1658. She did not expect him to agree so readily. Mo's expression went blank for a moment. He paused for a moment before saying, okay. His voice was a little flat. When he said the last word, he finally raised his eyebrows a little and there was a hint of joy in his voice. After the successful engagement on the high platform, Shinjuli and Mo each had a light red thin line on their wrists. It was like the red line of the moon god. When Shinjuli said, I will cancel the engagement, the thin line automatically broke and flashed in the air and disappeared. Once this thing disappeared, their engagement was automatically cancelled. From then on, he would no longer be her fiancé, and he would have nothing to do with her. Mo looked at her wrist quietly. It was as smooth as before, and there was no longer anything that made her feel like she was imprisoned. This was also the result she wanted for more than a month. Now that she had succeeded, she felt that it was unreal. He should be relieved, he should be happy, but what the hell was that indescribable pain in the depths of his heart? Shinjuli turned and walked away. Although he had suffered such a big blow, his steps were still very steady, but his speed was slightly faster. His back looked a little bleak and lonely. It was a little painful to look at. Mo paused and added, you can take Myanmar with you. After all, he was his biological son. The child would have a brighter future with him. Shinjuli paused for a moment, but he did not turn around. He only responded with a faint, okay, and added, where is he? I will take him with me. Mo's expression changed. He is not with you. Shinjuli suddenly turned around and looked at her face. Is he not with you? Mo was speechless. Mo Palace was in a state of chaos like never before. Everyone was mobilized to search for a child, turning the sky upside down. No. 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 They had searched everywhere, even snake holes and rat nests, but they still couldn't find the little ancestor. It was as if the little fellow had disappeared from the face of the earth. No one knew where he was. Emo pursed her lips tightly. She used all kinds of spells to search, but to no avail. Her face was getting paler and paler, and her heart was beating faster and faster. Although the little guy was smart, he was still a child who had only been born for a little over a month. Who would take him if he got lost? Little Nienma's shadow flashed in her mind. His big eyes that longed for affection flashed by, and the last scene when she saw him flashed by. All right, I'm going to see your father and treat him. I can't disturb him. Go play in the garden first. Mother will find you later. Sure. Mother, you must cure father. Father will definitely be very happy. Don't be long-winded, go. Then he ran away. That little fellow had always hoped that his mother and father would love each other. Since he was young, he had been trying his best to bring them together. Every time he begged her to save his father, he would try to please her and be obedient. When he heard that she would save his father, he was so happy that his eyes were as bright as the stars. When he ran away, his footsteps were very happy. At that time, his little heart must have been jumping with joy. He must have been waiting for her in the garden yesterday, waiting for her good news. He must have been waiting for her to say that his father had been cured. Chapter 1659. He was an impatient child, so he must be waiting anxiously for her. Emo could almost see the way the child was eagerly waiting for her. Her heart felt like a pot of boiling water was boiling in her heart. She did not feel anything when the child was around, but now that he was missing, she knew that the world was falling apart. Her brain was buzzing, and her hands and feet were cold. All kinds of images of the child being kidnapped and abused flashed through her mind. She saw him begging on the street with broken arms and legs, having his organs dug out and sold, and being sold to remote mountains. She did not know where these images came from. The more she thought about it, the more panicked she became. She seemed to hear little Nienma crying for his parents. Her heart was in pain, as if it was being squeezed by an invisible hand. It was so tight that she could not breathe. Nienma. Nienma. Nothing must happen to you. Her footsteps were getting more and more hurried. She went to the garden, the study room, and the bedroom. Gu Shijiu had checked every single place that little Nienma frequented, but she could not find any trace of him. People were like this. The more they could not find anything, the more they would want to search again and again. Although they knew that there was no result, they could not control their footsteps. She ran to the garden again. She had asked little Nienma to wait in the garden. The security of the Mo palace was so tight, and little Nienma was harmless to anyone. How could he go missing? How could he go missing? She ran too fast and tripped on something. Suddenly, she staggered a few steps forward and directly fell into someone's arms. A faint fragrance like the Buddha lotus entered her nose. Mo's body stiffened, but the person had already held her and stepped back silently to keep a distance from her. Mo secretly took a breath and looked at the person who was checking something not far away. You. Did you find anything? Her voice was unconsciously trembling. No. Shinjioli only answered her with 2 words. His expression was very cold. It seemed that he treated her like a stranger after he broke off the engagement. Just now, when they were in a hurry to search, they met a few times, but he did not talk to her and just hurriedly passed by. Mo closed her eyes slightly and tried to calm herself down. She didn't say anything else and began to search the surroundings. Little Nienma was very active, and his scent was everywhere in the garden. Therefore, it was impossible to find him with just his scent alone. She could only make inferences based on what she knew and everything around her. She asked little Nienma to wait in the garden. Although the boy was naughty, he was a man of his words. Since he promised to wait here, he would wait in the garden. Even if she didn't get impatient, he could only run back to Shinjuli's courtyard to look for her and visit his father. According to the kid's patience, he could probably wait for 2 hours. Mo's gaze fell on Shinjuli. When did you leave Imo Palace? I didn't see him before I left Imo Palace. Midnight. I haven't, Shinjuli answered succinctly. Mo's heart sank. Shinjuli had left so late, yet that little fellow had not come to his courtyard to look for him. This meant that something had happened to him long ago. His disappearance was most likely in the garden, or on the way to Shinjuli's courtyard. Regardless of whether it was in the garden or on the way, it was a very safe place. Logically speaking, it was impossible for him to be lost. Could it be that an outsider had sneaked in and kidnapped him? Chapter 1660. The garden was a forbidden area in the Mo Palace, and only a limited number of people came here. Other than the children, only butler Himu, Yi Tianli, and Shinjuli had been here before. Therefore, the smell was not too complicated. Mo's sense of smell was not very sensitive, so she could only put her hope on Shinjuli, who was searching nearby. He was very careful and did not miss a single leaf or bush. Mo organized her thoughts and quickly told him what she knew. Shinjuli listened to her in silence. He only glanced at her. Although his eyes were calm, it was as cold as ice. It was as if he was condemning her. Since she had promised the child, why couldn't she see the child before she left? So that he did not have to wait. Mo felt a stab in her heart when he looked at her. She could not help but sneer. You are not qualified to condemn me. Don't worry about your son. If anything happens to him, you. At this point, her throat was blocked by a ball of cotton. She could not continue her sentence. If anything happened to little Nianma, she did not know how to forgive herself. Perhaps, she would not be able to forgive herself for the rest of her life. She had long thought that little Nianma should not be by her side. She would kill everyone she cared about. The more she cared about someone, the easier it was to lose them. It was not the first time that God had played her like this. She had wanted to push them away. She had pushed away everything that she cared about. Why did she have to bear the loss? Why? She did not know why, but the grievance in her heart was overwhelming. It made her nose sour and her throat tight. She stood in the same spot with her eyes lowered. Her fingers were cold, and suddenly her wrist tightened. Her small hand was held by someone. The big hand was warm and completely covered her cold little hand. Don't be afraid. Nianma will be fine. The voice was as calm as usual. Mo suddenly raised her head and looked into a pair of deep blue eyes. The eyes were as calm as water, but there was a kind of power that could calm people's hearts. It silently comforted her heart, which was already extremely panicked. At this moment, she was like a hedgehog that would prick anyone she saw. She looked extremely sharp, but in fact, she was very afraid. She seemed to have experienced this feeling before, and it left a deep impression on her. She wished she could suppress it into the deepest recesses of her memory, never wanting to taste it again. But she didn't expect that she would experience it all over again. That feeling of hopelessness, helplessness, anxiety, and fear haunted her like a nightmare, making it hard for her to breathe. At this moment, she was no longer the high and mighty demon master, but a mother who had lost her child. She vaguely remembered how she felt when she had a miscarriage. She couldn't keep the thing she cared about the most. She could only watch it disappear. No one helped her. At that time, no one helped her. She prayed to all the gods and Buddhas, but no one extended a helping hand to her to save her child. Humans were like this. When they had once suffered a deep pain, both their body and heart would be extremely sensitive to this kind of pain. Once they suffered a similar kind of pain again, they would lose their minds. His behavior was far from his usual standard. Just like now, it was as if she had been sent into a nightmare that she could not wake up from. Her back was straight, but her little face was terrifyingly pale. She bit her lips so hard that she didn't even notice that the corner of her lips was bleeding, her mind was blank, and she almost could not think. Her whole body was standing on the edge of a cliff, with one foot hanging in the air. It seemed that she would fall at any time. Suddenly, her body was pulled into a strong embrace, and a calm voice echoed in her ears, "Don't be afraid, Shuema. Leave everything to me. I will find our child. Nienma will be fine." Chapter 1661. The embrace was familiar yet strange, with a slight warmth. Mo's body stiffened, but she did not react. He had already let go of her and took a step back to look for clues. Mo stood in the same place. She could still feel the residual warmth of his embrace. The moment he let go of her, she felt cold, and her heart seemed to be empty. Of course, this feeling was only for a moment, and she quickly ignored it. It was a very short hug, but strangely, it had a soothing effect. Her panicked heart finally calmed down a little. After thinking for a moment, she wanted to continue looking along the way. Shinjiuli, who was looking under a tree, suddenly picked up something from the grass on the ground and looked at it carefully under the sunlight. Mo instinctively felt that he had found something new. She could not help but move closer to him and look at his hand. It was a jade bead. It was very small and looked like one of the beads in a string. It was shining between Shinjiuli's 2 fingers. Mo had a very good memory. She immediately said, "This is the jade bead string on Yi Tianli's wrist." Shinjiuli glanced at her. She was very clear about the things that other men wore. However, this was not the time to look into these messy things. He put the bead near his nose and sniffed it. After a moment, he said, "He was here yesterday." He could infer the time when the bead left the body based on the smell on it. He looked around and said, "Nienma's smell is the strongest here. There are no traces of a fight. If I am not wrong, Nienma was attacked from behind and taken away." Mo clenched her fingers and turned to leave without saying a word. She was going to cut Yi Tianli into pieces. When she was about to fly into the air, the directed audio spell suddenly lit up. She opened it and heard the report from General Manager Himu. "Devil Master, the Celestial Emperor and hundreds of his subordinates are outside Mo Palace. They are asking to see you and Mr. He." What were they doing here? Mo was impatient. She was now in a hurry to find Yi Tianli and bring back the child. She did not have time to deal with the Celestial Emperor. She was about to say, "No time," when her little hand was suddenly held by someone. "Let's go and have a look." Shinjiuli had always been fast. While Mo was still in a daze, he had already flown out of the palace with Shinjiuli. Mo angrily said, "I'm not in the mood to look at them." He wanted to pull his hand away. However, what Shinjiuli said next made her stop in her tracks. "If I am not mistaken, Nienma is in their hands." Mo, Shinjiuli was a gentleman. He didn't take advantage of her. He let go of her hand and flew in front of her. "Let's go." With a gust of wind, she had already overtaken him, flying even faster than Shinjiuli. Shinjiuli breathed a sigh of relief as he watched her leave in a hurry. Mother and child were connected by heart. No matter what, she still cared about her child. As long as, it was good that he still had something he cared about. A group of people stood outside the Mo Palace. After all, they were all celestial beings of different sizes. Their bodies were shining with auspicious lights that almost broke through the sky. The purpose of this group of people was unknown. The guards of the Mo Palace naturally did not dare to be careless. They lined up in a row to confront the people from the celestial world. Fortunately, the people from the celestial world did not intend to attack the Mo Palace. After the report, the Celestial Emperor and the others waited outside with their hands down. This made the guards of the Mo Palace feel relieved. When Mo and Shinjiuli flew out, they saw this scene. As soon as Mo came out, the people of the Mo clan immediately knelt down. We pay our respects to the Devil Master. Mo waved her hand to signal them to get up. However, her eyes quickly swept across the celestial beings on the opposite side, but she did not see the child. Chapter 1662. The immortals were behaving strangely this time. In the past, they would kneel and kowtow whenever they saw her. Even the celestial emperor had to bow to her. Now, the group of immortals only bowed to her collectively. As for the celestial emperor, he only bowed to her. Devil Master. Mo smiled. Once she calmed down, her reasoning ability was still very strong. She was too lazy to talk to the celestial emperor. She went straight to the point. Is Nianma in your hands? Are you here to negotiate with me? The celestial emperor was stunned. He did not expect her to be so straightforward. After a short pause, he replied, Devil Master, don't worry. Prince Nianma is very safe. Now, no one in the Fantian Palace dares to trouble him. The only thing he cares about now is his father. The Fantian Palace? None of the people present were rookies, so they naturally knew where the Fantian Palace was. According to legend, it was the place where the only Divine Lord used to live. It was located above the 36th level of the sky. Since the Divine Lord disappeared, the place was automatically sealed. No one had ever entered it. Of course, no one had the ability to enter it, not even the Celestial Emperor. Now, Shin Nianma could easily enter it. Was he the reincarnation of the Divine Lord? Or was he the descendant of the Divine Lord? Everyone's eyes were fixed on Shinjiuli, who had not said a word since he appeared. If Shin Nianma was the son of God, then Shinjiuli should be the Divine Lord. Everyone in the world knew that the Divine Lord and the Devil Lord were once enemies. A great war broke out between them. They were born to be enemies. The devils shouted and protected the Devil Master in the middle. Shinjiuli was isolated. Countless swords and knives were aimed at Shinjiuli. The immortals did not dare to show weakness. They immediately rushed forward and wanted to surround Shinjiuli. Shinjiuli didn't care about the demonic swords and sabers that were aimed at him. His face was gloomy as he looked at Heavenly Monarch's face and said indifferently, "You dare to plot against me?" His voice wasn't loud, but it was extremely intimidating, causing Heavenly Monarch's heart to turn cold. He slowly knelt down in front of Shinjiuli. "I don't dare, I just want to verify. If I have offended you in any way, please punish me. Please return to your original position." The group of immortals behind him knelt down together. "Please return to your original position, Supreme Divinity." Their voices were like a landslide and a tsunami, extremely imposing. In these troubled times, the celestial realm was looking forward to the Supreme Divinity's return. Ever since the day of the Devil Lord's engagement banquet, the Sky Emperor had been suspicious of Shinjiuli's identity. After returning, he tried to find out more about his background. The celestial realm was naturally very well informed. As long as he inquired seriously, he could still find many clues. He knew that Shinjiuli had drifted out of the fiery gold sea and that no one had ever seen him before. The fiery gold sea was a sea that even gods and ghosts couldn't get close to. No matter what fell into it, it would melt into dregs. Not even a molecule would be left behind. However, this person was able to come out of the fiery gold sea alive. This could be considered a miracle. Hence, Heavenly Monarch's suspicions grew. He became more and more suspicious that Shinjiuli was the Supreme Divinity. If the Supreme Divinity was reborn, it would naturally cause an uproar in heaven and earth. There would be countless auspicious signs, and the celestial realm would naturally know. However, what if the Supreme Divinity had never been immortalized? What if the Supreme Divinity had just left this continent? What if the Supreme Divinity had not been reborn but had returned in a low-key manner? Naturally, there wouldn't be any strange signs on this continent. Chapter 1663. After figuring this out, the celestial Thearch's heart felt as if it had been hooked by a small hook, scratching and scratching incessantly. He was even more convinced that Shinjioli was the Divine Lord, but he did not know why he was unwilling to admit it. Of course, to be on the safe side, he still wanted to verify it a few more times. He thought of the Fantion Palace that only those with the bloodline of God could enter. He did not dare to provoke Shinjioli for the time being, so he turned his attention to Shin Nianma. Shin Nianma had been staying in the Mo Palace. The security there was very tight, and those who were not familiar with the terrain could not enter at all. Therefore, the Celestial Emperor sent someone to find Yi Tianli, who was drinking in a corner of the world, and told him his speculation. This matter involved the safety of the entire Celestial Kingdom. Yi Tianli did not dare to be dispirited at this moment. The Divine Lord and the Great Devil were natural enemies. If they were unintentionally together, the creatures in this world would be tortured again when they found out the truth. Even if the two of them did not fight, it would be inappropriate for the Divine Lord to stay in the Mo Palace. Moreover, there were too many variables. Besides, Shinjioli had robbed Yi Tianli of his marriage. Although Yi Tianli was willing to admit defeat, he still felt uncomfortable. He felt that his wife had been taken away from him. However, there was nothing he could do. If Shinjioli was really the Divine Lord, then the marriage between him and the Great Devil would obviously be impossible. How could a Divine Lord and a Divine Lord be a loving couple? Therefore, as long as he exposed Shinjioli's identity, Yi Tianli would indirectly take revenge. Yi Tianli still wanted to find out the truth. His mission was to steal the little bun, Shin Nianma. Yi Tianli had been in the Mo Palace for nearly 2 years. Naturally, he was very familiar with the layout of the palace. His kung fu was very good, so it was easy for him to sneak into the Mo Palace to find an opportunity. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation in the Mo Palace. Both Mo and Shinjioli were highly skilled. Shin Nianma almost never left their hands. Yi Tianli had been hiding in the Mo Palace for a few days, but he still could not find a chance. Coincidentally, Shinjioli was injured and recuperating in the house yesterday. Mo had to leave as well, so Shin Nianma was left alone in the garden. Although Shin Nianma was different from the other children, he was not as alert as Yi Tianli. Therefore, there was no doubt that Yi Tianli would be able to attack him. Therefore, after Yi Tianli succeeded, he easily left Mo Palace and returned to the immortal world. Of course, Yi Tianli was very careful when it came to Shin Nianma. He only knocked him out and did not dare to hurt him. When Shin Nianma woke up from his coma, he found himself standing alone in front of a palace. The surroundings were quiet, and there were no onlookers around. Shin Nianma did not know what had happened. He looked at the palace in confusion and vaguely felt that the palace was very familiar. The child was curious and playful, so he ran directly into the palace that no one else could enter. Of course, the Sky Emperor and Yi Tianli, who were hiding in the dark, saw everything clearly. At this time, the Sky Emperor and Yi Tianli basically had no doubts. Shinjioli, who suddenly appeared, was the legendary Divine Lord. The Divine Lord that they had been waiting for was already on this continent. He was also the fiancé of the Devil Lord. Since he was the Divine Lord, they naturally had to find a way to welcome him back. Of course, the little bun, Shin Nianma, had to be returned as soon as possible. Chapter 1664. After the first encounter, the Celestial Emperor and the rest knew that Shinjioli was not easy to talk to. If they did not send Shin Nianma back safely, he would immediately kill his way to the Celestial Kingdom. Therefore, the Celestial Emperor called for Shin Nianma to come out quickly and take him to find his father. However, he called for a long time, but there was no response from inside. The Celestial Emperor and the rest did not know how he was doing inside. After thinking of all kinds of ways to contact him, they finally heard Shin Nianma's faint crying. The little guy was calling for father and mother, and then he said that he could not find the way out. The Celestial Emperor and the rest of the celestial immortals could not enter, and the little bun could not get out. Both sides were anxious. The Celestial Emperor's original plan was quite good. He led a group of celestial immortals to the Mo Palace to pick up Shin Yinma. Even if the Divine Lord and the Great Devil were angry, they would not really punish them when they saw that the child was fine. He even thought of all kinds of words and made all kinds of preparations. He even specially picked an auspicious time. However, now that Shin Yinma was trapped in the Fantion Palace, the Celestial Emperor and the rest did not dare to delay too much. They immediately sent people to guard outside the Fantion Palace to talk to the little guy inside and calm him down. The Celestial Emperor led a group of officials to the Mo Palace to invite the Divine Lord. That was why the scene in the morning happened. The Celestial Emperor also went all out. He knelt in the dust and showed a posture of being ready to be punished. He briefly explained what happened. Shinjuli's face was pale. Since he came to this continent, there were always a variety of scattered images in his mind. They were all bits and pieces of the past on this continent. From then on, he knew that he used to belong to this world. He had always been a careful person. After a little inquiry on this continent, he knew the legend of the Celestial Devil. In his heart, he had already vaguely guessed who he was. He had always done things as he pleased. Even if he knew that he was probably the legendary Divine Lord, he did not intend to return to that position. He was Shinjuli now, and he would always be Shinjuli. He would never be the Divine Lord who was the enemy of the devil. He only wanted to get his woman back and live hand in hand with her in this world. As for the legendary Divine Lord who killed the devil and defended justice, who was kind to the world, fair, selfless, and merciful. What was that? Can it be eaten? What he did not expect was that the Celestial Emperor would use such a trick to force him to return to his position under the watchful eyes of the public. He even used little Nyenma as a hostage. The Celestial Emperor probably thought that as a supreme divinity, he would have to take care of his own identity and would not punish the people who welcomed him back to the celestial world. That was why he was so humble and kneeling in the dust to admit his guilt. Moreover, he made such a scene and revealed his identity as the supreme god in front of everyone. Not to mention that Mo already disliked him, even if he and Mo were in love now. After his identity was exposed, the demons of the devil realm would not allow him to stay in Mo Palace anymore. Who would be willing to let their enemies stay in their territory? At this moment, even if he did not admit his former identity, he was afraid that the people of the demon race would have scruples about him. The Heavenly Emperor really had a good plan. Shinjuli's eyes fell on the Celestial Emperor's head. His eyes were cold. Suddenly, he curled his lips and smiled. Yun Lang, do you know what the punishment for scheming against the Supreme Divinity is? Yun Lang was the Dharma name of the Celestial Emperor of the Celestial Devil Continent. It was also his secular name. No one dared to call this name directly for many years. Unexpectedly, Shinjuli called it out so easily. The turning point was coming. Ha! Chapter 1665. The Celestial Thearcha's body stiffened. He had no idea how the Supreme Divinity knew his real name. He lowered his head and said, I don't know. I did something wrong for the safety of the Celestial Realm and the Supreme Divinity. I'm willing to accept my punishment. His words were very eloquent. He humbly admitted his mistake and said that he did it for the greater good of the Celestial Realm. If Shinjuli was truly a benevolent god, he would not hold it against him. At most, he would reprimand him. Yes, Your Majesty, you did it for the safety of the 6 realms. The Supreme Divinity is merciful and will forgive Your Majesty. That's right. The Supreme Divinity is a benevolent god. He won't take offense to heart. The immortals had been in the celestial realm for many years. They were all old foxes. One by one, they began to praise Shinjiuli. These people seemed to be flattering Shinjiuli, but they were implying that Shinjiuli should be merciful as a divine lord. He should be magnanimous and not be calculative. If he were to be calculative, he would lose his godhood. Shinjiuli looked down at the rows of white poplar immortals kneeling on the ground. His lips curled up slightly. He did not say anything. Instead, he slowly walked toward the celestial arch. His aura made the kneeling immortals feel as if they were under heavy pressure. The celestial Thearcha's expression changed drastically. He felt that he was in big trouble. However, he had already accepted his punishment. He could not take it back now. All he could do was wait. The celestial Thearcha's heart almost jumped out of his chest when he saw the supreme divinity standing in front of him. The supreme divinity above his head spoke slowly. Those who go against the will of the celestial realm will either be caned 300 times or have their immortal power destroyed. Which one do you choose? The celestial arch, as the supreme divinity of the celestial realm, he had to be beaten in public. The pain was one thing, but the humiliation was another. Supreme divinity. Supreme divinity is merciful. The celestial Thearcha's handsome face turned pale. That was the only thing left in his mind. Shinjiuli said calmly, "It seems that you don't understand the word supreme divinity. Then I'll learn my lesson. You received 2 punishments." This sentence blocked all of the celestial emperor's paths of retreat. In the end, the celestial arch chose the first option. Being caned 300 times was better than being crippled and becoming immortal, so he chose the first option. Shinjiuli was still quite humane. He let him call the executioner from the celestial world to carry out the punishment. Of course, the other people in the celestial world and the devil crowd at the entrance of Mo Palace were the supervisors. Shinjiuli did not stay to watch the execution. Before he left, he only said one sentence to the executioner: "Don't go easy on him, double the penalty." Then he glanced at the crowd around him and said, "Everyone, please be my witness." With Shinjiuli's words and the execution in front of so many people, even if the executioner was given 8 times the courage, he would not dare to go easy on the execution. It was only at this moment that the immortals finally understood that this supreme god was not a benevolent supreme god. He was a vengeful person who would never be provoked. The rumors were wrong. Shinjiuli no longer cared about the celestial arch who was being punished. He turned to look at Mo, who was surrounded by the devil crowd. Mo was also looking at him. Their eyes met, and Mo suddenly smiled. She smiled and said, "Congratulations." So he was her archenemy from tens of thousands of years ago. So they had always been enemies. Chapter 1666. Now that he had regained his identity, he wouldn't pester her anymore, right? Shinjiuli's eyes darkened. He naturally understood what she meant by congratulations. His gaze fell on her, and then he reached out to her. Mo, come with me to pick up the child." "Devil Master, don't." "Devil Master, you can't go." "Devil Master, this person has evil intentions and has been hiding in our Mo palace. I'm afraid he's up to no good. I'm afraid it'll be disadvantageous for you if you go." The demons around her started to clamor. Gods and demons couldn't coexist, so immortals and demons naturally couldn't coexist either. Even if they were at peace, it was only on the surface. In fact, immortals and demons were very wary of each other. The demons deeply believed that these immortals were definitely up to no good. The demons surrounded Mo like a tide, afraid that she would fall into Shinjiuli's trap. Although Shinjiuli had publicly punished the Celestial Emperor, who knew if this wasn't a trick they had planned? Their goal was to trick the Devil Master, who had finally returned, into their trap, therefore, they definitely couldn't let the Devil Master fall into their trap. The demons were all furious, and head steward He Mu was the most furious of them all. He regretted it. Extremely regretful. This Shinjioli was obviously not an ordinary person. His martial arts were profound and unfathomable. Even if he didn't speak, he still had an aura that made it hard for people to breathe. With such obvious characteristics, he didn't expect him to be a supreme divinity. He allowed him to stay by the Devil Master's side, and even sympathized with him when he occasionally saw him suffer in front of the Devil Master. Now, it seemed that he was really blind. The Devil Master was still wise. Even if he didn't know the other party's identity, he wasn't moved by his actions and still treated him coldly like an enemy. The Devil Master was wise. He was really too wise. Head Steward Himu snorted on the side and said with a fake smile, "Divine Lord, your thoughts are indeed unpredictable. You're actually willing to lower yourself in our Mo palace. Please forgive us if we've neglected you these days. Now that Supreme Divinity has revealed your identity, please return to your Fantion Palace." Shinjioli ignored him. Shinjioli had always been able to ignore people who had nothing to do with him. He kept looking at Mo. "What? You don't dare." Head Steward Himu immediately said, "Devil Master, he's trying to goad you. You're wise, you definitely won't fall for his trick." It was not easy for the Devil race to be able to hold their heads high today, and it was all thanks to the Devil Lord holding the fort in the Devil race. If anything were to happen to the Devil Lord, the Devil race would most likely be driven to the barren lands of this continent. Thus, for the sake of the demon realm's safety, Manager Himu threw caution to the wind. He was certain that the Devil Lord would not be fooled, but he did not expect Mo to flick his sleeves and push away the demons around him. He walked step by step towards Shinjioli. "Butler Himu, Demon Master." "Himu, there's no need for you to say anything else. I'll be right back." Mo's words sealed the situation, causing all the devils to shut their mouths instantly. Mo didn't hold Shinjioli's hand. Instead, he brushed past him and said, "Let's go." The two of them left side by side, leaving behind a group of immortals and devils staring at each other. Shui Lan slowly walked out from behind the door. He looked at the two figures flying into the air in a slight daze. Although Mo had become much more taciturn, her most basic personality hadn't changed. She did things straightforwardly. Once she decided to do something, she didn't hesitate or overthink. No one could influence her, he just didn't know what kind of development would happen between her and Shinjioli after she left. Or would she just want to see the child? Chapter 1667. The Fantion Palace was located on the 36th level of the sky. Outside the Fantion Palace, Yi Tianli stood there and talked to Shen Nianma from time to time. At first, Shen Nianma replied to him, but he suddenly screamed and stopped talking. Yi Tianli's heart almost jumped out of his chest. If anything happened to the little brat in there, he would not be able to pay for it even if he had 8 lives. Not to mention that Shinjioli would not forgive him when he returned to his position, even Mo would not let him go. He used to be the most powerful person in the 6 realms, but that was excluding the Divine Lord and the Great Devil. In front of these two people, he was nothing but a weakling. He could only be tortured. It was already difficult for him to deal with one of them. If these two great gods were to fight him at the same time, he did not even dare to imagine how he would die. In order to get in touch with Shen Nianma, he almost used up all his strength. He used all kinds of spells to see what was going on inside. However, there was no movement inside. It seemed that the little guy had an accident. Although the Fantion Palace was the old residence of the Divine Lord, it had been uninhabited for tens of thousands of years. No one knew what was inside. If a child like Shen Nianma encountered something strange and mysterious in there, he was not even qualified to fight with him. When Shinjioli and Mo arrived, Yi Tianli was anxiously pacing around outside. He was almost going crazy. When he saw the two of them together, Yi Tianli's face suddenly turned pale. He braced himself to go forward and bowed. He braced himself and quickly explained the situation inside. Shinjioli did not pay attention to him at all. He immediately rushed into the palace without waiting for him to finish. The palace gate, which was regarded as a natural barrier by many immortals, was nothing to him. Seeing this, Yi Tianli could not help but sigh. At first, he still had a little hope that Shen Jiuli was not the Divine Lord, but that Shen Nianma was the reincarnation of the Divine Lord. Now that he saw Shen Jiuli rushing in as if it was his own house, what else could he say? The other party was definitely the Divine Lord. Sure enough. Yi Tianli could not help but look towards Amo. Amo stood outside the palace gates and stared at the palace gates in a daze. She vaguely felt that the palace gates looked very familiar. She didn't follow Shen Jiuli into the palace because she knew that if Shen Jiuli didn't open the palace gates, an outsider like her wouldn't be able to enter. Shen Jiuli was probably concerned about the children who were trapped inside, so he rushed in directly. Amo. Yi Tianli actually had the urge to take the opportunity to run away. However, he also knew that the monk could run away, but the temple could not. If he were to run away now, Shen Jiuli and the other person would definitely not spare him. At that time, he would die even more miserably. Therefore, he could only bite the bullet and try to get close to Amo. After all, he had been with her for nearly 2 years. Even if there was no love, there was still friendship. For the sake of these 2 years of friendship, he hoped that Amo would put in a good word for him. Amo finally turned around to look at him. She looked him up and down and suddenly smiled sweetly. Her smile made Yi Tianli absent-minded for a moment. He only felt that her smile was as if there were flowers flying from the sky. However, what she said next made Yi Tianli feel as if he had been hit by a stick. Yi Tianli, which hand did you use to carry little Nianma? This sentence was obviously malicious. Yi Tianli's face changed, and he took a step back. Amo. Amo still looked at him with a smile. Chapter 1668. Amo was still looking at him with a smile, but her eyes were already looking at his 2 arms. Or should I say, you used both of your hands. She stretched out her small hand, and the Zhutian sword slowly appeared in her palm. Yi Tianli had goosebumps all over his body. His face was pale. Amo, I did not mean to hurt Nianma. Amo's voice was cold. If you wanted to hurt him, do you think you can still live? How dare he kidnap someone in her palace? He even took away her most precious baby. She pointed the tip of the sword at Yi Tianli. My patience is limited. If you don't answer me, I have to choose myself. If she let him choose, he would not be able to keep both of his arms. Yi Tianli knew that he could not escape today, so he had to stretch out his right arm. Use it. As soon as he said the word, a gust of wind swept past, and he suddenly felt a sharp pain in his arm. He opened his eyes with sweat all over his forehead and saw that half of his right arm was gone. It was not cut off, but vaporized. Blood gushed out from the wound, and Yi Tianli's forehead instantly broke out in cold sweat. The pain from the Zhutian sword was excruciating. He raised his hand to seal the acupoints to stop the bleeding, but the pain almost made him unable to stand. He looked at Amo with a pale face. He could not believe that she would treat him so coldly. Amo, you are so cruel. He whispered. A demon was a demon. No matter how good he used to be to her, as long as he let her down once, he would suffer the most tragic revenge. Although only one of his arms was cut off, the wound from the Zhutian sword was not something he could withstand. Without the antidote, he would not be able to live for more than 3 days. He was also arrogant, so he did not want to beg her again. He smiled sadly. Amo, take care. He turned and was about to leave. Suddenly, a small green bottle flew to his feet, and Amo's voice came from behind him. This is the antidote. Yi Tianli was stunned and subconsciously grabbed the antidote bottle. He held it tightly in his hand and looked at Amo with a complicated expression. Amo only replied with one word, go away. Yi Tianli did not dare to say anything else. He hurriedly grabbed the bottle of antidote, bowed his head and thanked her. Then, he staggered away. Mo looked at the tip of the sword that was still dripping with blood. His eyes flickered slightly, but no one knew what he was thinking. Mother! A small figure rushed out and hugged her leg. Mo sheathed his sword and looked at the little girl at his feet. Her cheeks were rosy and her eyes were watery. It was obvious that she hadn't suffered much. Mo finally breathed a sigh of relief. She bent over and picked him up, rubbing his head and feet to make sure there were no external or internal injuries. She was still a little puzzled. You look pretty good. Why didn't you answer the person outside who was screaming for you? Shen Nianma snorted. He is the bad guy who kidnapped Nianma. I just won't say anything. I just want him to be anxious outside. Mo. The little guy was already so scheming at such a young age. Mo couldn't bear to let go of the baby in his arms. The baby was so soft and tender in his arms that Mo couldn't bear to let go. But so what if he couldn't bear it? What was not hers would not be hers after all. She looked up and saw Shinjioli leaning against the palace door. His eyes were unpredictable and looking at her. There seemed to be gentleness at the bottom of his eyes. The wind blew his clothes and set off the vermilion palace door behind him. It was like a painting. Mo's heart skipped a beat and looked away. Chapter 1669. Now that she had seen the child and knew that he was indeed unharmed, she was relieved. It was time for her to go back to her own place. Although she thought so, she could not bear to leave the little baby in her arms. Shen Nianma did not know what she was thinking. He hugged her neck and felt wronged. Mother, why didn't you come to see me yesterday? I was waiting there for you. I wanted to go back to see you, but I was afraid that you would say that I did not keep my promise. In the end, I was caught by someone. Mo still felt guilty about this. She could not help but kiss him on his little face. Nianma, you are such a good boy. It is all my fault. I did not keep my promise and caused you to be arrested. She took out a toy that was difficult to understand and put it in Nianma's hand. Here, this is for you. Shen Nianma smiled. This is the first time that mother has given me a toy. Logically speaking, a child at this age should play with a rattle drum. However, this child was too smart. It was inappropriate to give him a rattle drum. For the past few days, she had been thinking of a gift for the child, but she could not find a suitable one. Later, she had an idea and made one herself. It was a very difficult Rubik's Cube toy. Even she did not expect to be able to make it. Little Nianma played with it for a while and immediately fell in love with it. He played with it in her arms. Shinjioli's eyes were fixed on the mother and daughter. However, he did not come over. When Mo put the toy in little Nianma's hand, he seemed to have guessed something. He slowly walked over. Don't talk outside. Let's go in. Mo secretly took a breath. When she was about to give the child to him and leave, she heard Shinjioli's directed audio. I know that you want to leave, but the child has just been a little frightened. He has just seen you and is still in shock. Do you have the heart to leave him now? Mo was speechless. She looked at the child in her arms. His lips were red and his teeth were white. He did not look frightened at all. He was using the child to trick her again. Shinjioli sighed softly and continued without changing his expression. When I went in, his eyes were swollen from crying. He was curled up in a corner and trembling. I used my divine power to treat him and pacify his soul. Only then was he able to look much more normal. In fact, he is still very afraid. His words made Mo's heart ache. She could be cruel to anyone but little Nianma. While she was deep in thought, Shinjioli was already facing the child. Nianma, why don't you invite your mother in? Little Nianma did not know that his father had used him as a trump card. He immediately hugged his mother's neck and said, "Mother, let's go in. The scenery inside is so beautiful, the palace is so big, and there are so many divine beasts. Mother will definitely like it when she sees it." Looking at little Nianma's bright eyes, Mo could not bear to leave him behind. Shinjioli seemed to know what she was worried about. Again, he smiled and said, "Don't worry. Our engagement has been cancelled. Are you still afraid that I will do something to you? I am a god after all." Mo glanced at him coldly and sent him a telepathic message. "You're a fraud." She strode toward the door of the palace. She would go in. Who was afraid of who? She would go in to play with the child for a while and take a look at the layout of her palace. He had already seen everything in her Mo palace. It would be a waste if she did not take a look at it. Chapter 1670. Besides, Shinjioli was a god, and with little Nianma by his side, he would not do anything immoral. Moreover, her magical power was not to be trifled with. If he really dared to do anything to her, she definitely had the ability to destroy his Fantian palace. The gate of the Fantian palace was more like a wizardry barrier than a gate. Usually, only the Divine Lord and those who had the bloodline of the Divine Lord could freely enter and leave. Of course, if the Divine Lord wanted guests to enter, he would have to open the gate so that outsiders could enter. The Fantian palace had always been covered by a clear cover. Even if people stood in front of it, they could not see its full appearance. It was like a mirage. After Shinjioli opened the gate of the Fantian palace, the layer of the cover disappeared and finally revealed its true appearance. What majestic, what magnificent, what resplendent, what resplendent, what resplendent, what resplendent, none of these could describe the imposing manner of the Fantian palace. The only feeling it gave people was shock. It was like a wanderer struggling in the desert suddenly saw the most beautiful and eye-catching mirage. It made people want to worship this building when they saw it. Mo stood outside and looked at the Fantian palace a few times. She vaguely felt that it was familiar. Then, she looked at Shinjioli who was standing at the gate and suddenly felt that this building was very compatible with this person. This building seemed to have become spiritual and had become a spirit. The Divine Lord. Tens of thousands of years ago, the archenemy. However, she did not expect to be entangled like this today. Mo had a rather strange feeling in her heart. She strode in with the child in her arms. The purple bamboo forest, the sea of clouds, and the looming pavilions in the clouds. Every scene was beautiful to the extreme. It was strange that no one had entered the Fantian palace for tens of thousands of years, but there was no sense of decadence and desolation. Whether it was the flowers, trees, or the pavilions, they all looked as if they had been trimmed and cleaned from time to time. Mo stepped on the green jade cobblestones, and on both sides of the fiery red maple forest. She lowered her head and asked the child in her arms, "What frightened you here?" Shin Nianma blinked his eyes. He was not frightened. He was only anxious because he could not find the way out when he first came in. Nianma was not afraid. "I thought it was fun inside. I kept running around. If father did not come in and carry me out, I would have continued to walk around." Mo glanced at Shinjioli, who was walking beside him. Shinjioli coughed softly. "Nianma, did you cry when you entered this place?" "I cried. I cried when I couldn't get out, then, did you cower under that wall and tremble?" Shinjioli pointed in the direction of a palace wall. Shin Nianma scratched his head. "I found a hole there. I wanted to go in, but it was very cold when I got close. Therefore, he shivered." Shinjioli turned to look at Mo and said matter-of-factly, "She cried." She shrank into a corner and shivered. "I'm not wrong." Mo, Shinjioli, you can be more shameless." Mother, there are mythological beasts over there." let me take you to see them. Shen Nianma struggled to move his body in one direction. Qiong Qi, Swan Ni, Zhu Long, Zhu Ke, and some other mythological beasts were either in the lake, on the shore, on both sides of the road, or under the eaves. Some were standing or lying down. Whether it was the scales, feathers, or the colors of the claws, all of them were lifelike. It was as if they could come to life with just a breath. Chapter 1671. She was right. These mythological beasts were all stone statues, but she could not tell what material they were made of. Shen Nianma had already jumped down from the ground and climbed on the back of a Qiong Qi. He stood on top of it and said, "Mother, these mythological beasts look so majestic." He then hugged the Qiong Qi's big mouth and said, "Nianma is also majestic." Imo laughed and said, "Little fool, no matter how majestic it looks, it is still made of stone. If you really want to be majestic, then ride on the real one." When she first heard Nianma talking about the mythological beasts, she was shocked. She was also a little relieved that little Nianma did not provoke the mythological beasts when he came in alone. Now that she knew that the mythological beasts were fake, she was naturally relieved. She had already looked at the layout of the Fantian Palace. It was indeed a few levels higher than her Mo Palace. However, it was not surprising. The Fantian Palace was the original residence of the Divine Lord. Nobody knew how many times it had been built. Naturally, even a stone could show its elegance. Her Mo Palace was only built less than 2 years ago. It had not really settled down yet. It was normal that it was not as good as the Fantian Palace. However, she did not know where her residence was tens of thousands of years ago. Perhaps it was not worse than the Fantian Palace. Originally, she was not curious about where she lived. According to her, wherever the mountains are, there are no bones to be buried. Wherever my heart is, that is my home. However, now that she saw the beautiful property of her old rival from tens of thousands of years ago, she began to feel competitive and began to miss her old residence. Of course, Shen Nianma did not know that his mother's thoughts had begun to wander. He sat on the back of the Qiong Qi and was happily kicking his little feet. He even used his fingers to pick the Qiong Qi's nostrils. "Little boy, don't destroy the cultural relics," Imo said and took a step forward to teach Shen Nianma a lesson. Unexpectedly, when her fingers just touched Shen Nianma's little hand, the stone Qiong Qi suddenly moved. It suddenly let out an earth-shattering sneeze. Imo was not prepared and subconsciously took a step back. She did not know what her heel was, so she stumbled and fell into someone's arms. "Be careful." A familiar smell entered her nose. Mo's heart skipped a beat. When she was about to get up, the other party had already let go of her. At the same time, the Qiong Qi's 4 feet, carrying Shen Nianma, rose into the air. Naturally, Shen Nianma was also shocked. He staggered and fell from the top. However, just as he slid down Qiong Qi's body, Qiong Qi opened its mouth and swallowed him whole. All of this happened too quickly, so quickly that no one could react in time. By the time Imo realized it, Shen Nianma was already gone. It had been swallowed. It had been swallowed. Her facial expression changed drastically. "Nianma." She quickly slapped the gigantic Qiong Qi that had suddenly come to life. Shen Jiuli waved his sleeve and a white light shot out, cutting off Mo's red light midway. Thus, Mo watched as the large blue Qiong Qi spread its wings in the air and flew away in the blink of an eye. With a splash, it jumped into the vast lake in the distance and disappeared without a trace. Mo, her hands and feet were cold. She slapped Shinjiuli, who had suddenly gone crazy. "You're crazy." He actually watched the child being swallowed without reacting. She slapped him with anger. Once the wind from her palm was released, it would be filled with an evil aura that could destroy half of the scenery here. However, before she could release the wind from her palm, Shinjioli moved at lightning speed. In the blink of an eye, he was in front of her and raised his hand to hook her wrist. Chapter 1672. However, before she could do anything, Shinjioli was already in front of her in the blink of an eye. He raised his hand and grabbed her wrist. Mo, don't worry. Nianma is fine. Her right wrist was caught, so she could not do anything. She was about to hit him again with her left hand, but she was stunned when she heard what he said. While she was in a daze, he had already hooked his arm around her waist and flew up. I'll take you to see it. Mo was worried about little Nianma, so she did not notice that he was holding her waist. She stared at the lake in the distance. He was swallowed. How can he be fine? Before she could finish her sentence, she saw the waves rolling on the lake, and Cheong-Chi's broad back was exposed. Little Nianma was riding on Cheong-Chi's back. He was so happy that he danced. This is so fun. Achoo! Cheong-Chi's head popped out of the water and sneezed loudly again. Like a whale, it sprayed out waves that were about 30 feet high. The white waves flew down, but they dispersed on top of little Nianma's head and did not splash on him at all. Cheong-Chi turned around and gently licked little Nianma with its big tongue. Little Nianma was also naughty. He directly used his arms to hug the big tongue and played like a swing. Cheong-Chi opened its big mouth and slowly retracted its tongue. A moment later, little Nianma sat on its tongue and looked out while holding its fangs. Cheong-Chi swam in the lake with him in its mouth. Little Nianma's giggles could be heard all over the lake. Mo was speechless. She finally felt relieved. It was only at this moment that she realized that Shinjioli was still holding her waist. Her pretty face was gloomy, and she was about to break free. Unexpectedly, Shinjioli let go of her before she could say anything. He even took a step back and sincerely apologized. I have offended you. Mo was about to scold him, but she could not say anything in front of his gentlemanly behavior. What is going on? Mo's eyes were still fixed on Cheong-Chi's body in the lake. He was afraid that this fellow would be so happy that it would close its mouth and chew the little guy inside. They are indeed the mythological beasts under my mount. They rely on the aura of God to be reborn. Little Nianma has the aura of God, so he activated them, Shinjioli explained. Then why don't you just activate them? But you let a child take the risk. Mo still had lingering fears as he recalled the scene earlier. They have been sleeping for tens of thousands of years. Whoever can awaken them again, they will recognize that person as their first master. They will absolutely obey their first master and will not harm him. Shinjioli continued to impart to her the knowledge of the mythological beasts. This child was his most precious treasure, so he naturally wanted to find some guardian beasts for his son. As for the divine beasts in his courtyard, they were all ancient divine beasts with extraordinary power. Ordinary immortals and devils couldn't even get close to them. With them by Nianma's side to protect him, he would feel more at ease. Therefore, he directly handed the task of awakening the sleeping divine beasts to his son. In the future, even if he was not by his son's side, no one would be able to plot against the little guy. What happened in the Mo palace would not happen again. Mo glanced at the surrounding divine beasts that had not yet been awakened. Are they also? She was relieved. Although there were no guards in the Fantian Palace, with these divine beasts here, it would not be a problem for Nianma to go anywhere he wanted. Perhaps she should take the opportunity to leave while Nianma was having fun in the lake to prevent the little guy from crying. Chapter 1673. Well, since he is having fun here, it is time for me to leave. You can take care of him yourself. Mo said. She waited for a moment, but did not hear Shinjioli's answer. Subconsciously, she turned around and saw that she was the only one left on the shore. Shinjioli was nowhere to be found. Mo was speechless. She quickly scanned her surroundings but still did not see Shinjioli. How could he disappear at such a critical moment? Mo looked at the child in the lake and the dangerous Cheong-chi. She did not dare to leave. It was impossible for such a small child to be alone with no adults. It was too dangerous. Shinjioli was missing, so she had to stay here and watch over him. Mo had the impulse to curse Shinjioli. After he tricked her into coming here, he did not do anything to her. He was even very polite. However, he had helped her, held her, and hugged her. Now, he even left her here alone to take care of the child. She could not find a chance to leave. Mother, do you want to come up and play? Cheong-chi swam to the shore. Shin Nianma held one of Cheong-chi's teeth and stretched out half of his body. He opened his little hand to her eagerly. The veins on Mo's forehead twitched. Nianma, go and play on Cheong-chi's back. He had been staying in Cheong-chi's mouth for a long time, and it always made her feel scared. She was afraid that Cheong-chi would bite him in half on a whim. Mother, you want to play too? Nianma will go on its back. Shin Nianma was negotiating with her, and the kid even rubbed his little belly on Cheong-chi's teeth. Mo was afraid that his intestines would be torn apart, so she had to agree. She jumped on Cheong-chi's back. Cheong-chi seemed to only be sensitive to the bloodline of God. When Mo jumped on its back, it immediately felt offended, and all the scales on its body stood up. It made a threatening sound. Don't be rude to my mother. Shin Nianma threatened as he climbed out of the Cheong-chi's mouth and onto its back. Cheong-chi probably understood, but was afraid of hurting its little master's delicate skin, so wherever the little fellow crawled, the scales would fall. But after all, it was a mythical beast that only obeyed God or God's bloodline. It was not willing to let Mo sit on its back, so it secretly made its scales into spikes where Mo sat, like a nail board, in order to make Mo retreat. Mo's eyes flashed slightly. Suddenly, he smiled at Shin Nianma. Nianma, you may leave first. Shin Nianma was surprised. Mother? Be good. Go down first. If you're not obedient, Mother will leave by herself. This sentence was more effective than any threat to Shin Nianma. He immediately jumped down and stood on the shore. Mother, be careful. Just as he went down, Cheong-chi flew up with a whoosh. It flew upside down, straight up, 180-degree somersaults, 360-degree turns, and sharp steel knives appeared all over its body. It plunged into the water and rolled in circles. Cheong-chi used all the methods he could think of to get rid of them. Unfortunately, Mo seemed to be growing on its back, and it could not get rid of her at all. In the beginning, Cheong-chi still cared about Shin Nianma's reputation. He was afraid that he would hurt Mo, so he only wanted to get rid of her, so he used a gentler method. Later on, the methods he used became more and more violent. It was an aquatic beast, so it used all kinds of water spells, but it still did not work. Chapter 1674. It carried her for almost an hour, but it still could not get the person on its back off. It could not help but feel a little discouraged. Are you done? It's my turn. Mo said coldly on its back. She stretched out her little hand and gently patted the back of its neck. Therefore, Cheong-chi screamed again. It suddenly jumped into the air and fell into the water. 2 hours later, Cheong-chi was exhausted. It lay in the water and gasped for breath. Its scales were all subdued. Mo was still sitting on its back. She smiled and patted its head. Not only is your master not easy to mess with, but I am also not easy to mess with. Cheong-chi whimpered, but it did not dare to be angry anymore. It was one of the 4 most ferocious beasts in the ancient times. In its life, it only listened to the teachings of God. Tens of thousands of years ago, it had done evil in the 6 realms. Many immortals and demons wanted to subdue it, but they all failed. It was only after the Divine Lord went and subdued it. It was very proud of itself. Although it had just woken up from a deep sleep for tens of thousands of years, it was confident that ordinary immortals and demons would not be able to get close to it. It did not expect that the delicate little girl in front of it could control it. In the law of the mythological beast, it only obeyed the strong. Therefore, Cheong-chi finally became obedient. "Mother, you are awesome. Mother, can you play with Nianma?" Shen Nianma rushed up and climbed onto Cheong-chi's back. Imo held him in her arms and took him for a ride on Cheong-chi. Shinjuli sat on top of a tree not far away. He looked at the mother and daughter who were playing with each other, and a smile appeared on his face. All he wanted was the warmth of today. The woman he loved and his sensible son were in front of him. They were all happy under his protection. He looked down and looked at his hands. This was a pair of hands that could turn the world upside down, but it was not enough to change all the fates. He only wanted to protect his woman and child for a little longer before they became very strong. The mother and child were having fun. Even Imo seemed to have forgotten everything. She hugged her son and laughed happily. Ever since they reunited, this was the first time he had seen her so happy and carefree. Shinjuli stared at her intently. It was as if he wanted to carve her figure into the depths of his soul. After watching for a long time, he turned around and left. Where did that bastard Shinjuli go? Did he still want his son? Imo rode Cheong-chi and took his son for a ride while silently observing his surroundings. One was to understand the architectural layout of Fantian Palace, and the other was to find Shinjuli. This person couldn't just abandon his son to her just to keep her here, right? What was this? Another way to keep her here. After playing for a while, she felt a little angry, as if she had been tricked by him again. "Mother, Nianma is hungry." Shen Nianma had enough fun and finally thought of his tummy. Coincidentally, his stomach growled a few times. Imo rubbed her eyebrows. She was not familiar with Fantian Palace, so she did not know where to find food. Moreover, this place had been sealed for tens of thousands of years. Even if there were still food stored, it would have been rotten long ago. Should she bring Nianma back to Mo Palace and raise him there? She had gathered a lot of top chefs there. Little Nianma also liked to eat the food that they made. She just had the idea of going back home. Chapter 1675. Just as she was about to return home, she suddenly heard the sound of a zither coming from the purple bamboo forest in the distance. The sound of the zither pierced through the clouds and water, making people feel like they were bathed in a spring breeze. Mo's heart jumped. Shinjuli. This person had her take care of the child here, but he was leisurely playing the zither. Damn it! When Cheong-chi heard the zither, its 2 little ears perked up. It folded its wings and flew towards the sound of the zither. The swallow grass swayed in the wind like silk. This grassland was surrounded by purple bamboo. In the middle of the grassland, there was an extremely lush and tall tree. Its leaves were like red maple, but the color was much brighter than red maple. It was like a raging fire, shining like the clouds. Shinjuli was dressed in a white robe as he sat under a tree. He placed a guqin on his lap and started to play. A series of notes flowed from his fingertips. The fiery red maple leaves fell and swirled around him as they fluttered in the wind. The scenery was beautiful to the extreme. Imo had to admit that Shinjuli was truly beautiful. He didn't need to do anything deliberately. He just sat there casually and it was a beautiful scene that even the painters couldn't paint. The sound of the zither was so beautiful that Cheong-chi was afraid of disturbing the person playing it. It folded its wings and landed on the ground. It was rare for such a huge body to not make any noise when it landed. Not even a blade of grass was disturbed. Amo had a stomach full of anger, but the sound of the zither had the effect of cleansing the soul. It actually made the anger in her heart slowly dissipate like a deflated balloon. She originally wanted to scold him, but after landing, she couldn't bear to interrupt him. She stopped in place. It was better to wait until he finished playing and then deal with him. Fortunately, this song wasn't long. It was only 2 or 3 minutes. When he plucked the last note, the sound of the zither curled up and stopped. The maple leaves that were flying around him also floated down. Your Excellency is so leisurely and carefree. You don't care about your son. Mo's cold voice finally scolded him. Shinjioli raised his head to look at her. His gaze was gentle. With you looking after him, I'm very relieved. Mo, she sneered again. So you kidnapped me to help you look after your child. Shinjioli stood up and walked towards her step by step. Mo raised his eyebrows and looked at him, not retreating a single step. Others were afraid of his divine might, but she wasn't. Her aura was not any weaker than his. Although she was small, her aura was not small. Her powerful aura spread out in all directions, causing Cheong-chi to tremble and take a step back. Shinjioli walked up to her and asked, "Are you very angry?" Mo snorted but didn't say anything. His figure was tall and big, while her body was relatively short. Compared to him, she could be considered petite and dainty. That was the difference in height between men and women, but not the difference in aura between gods and devils. His figure almost covered her entire body. The feeling of being lower in height made her uncomfortable, but if she suddenly became taller, it would seem a little intentional. How about she stand on the big rock next to her? In the time she was stunned, Shinjioli had already approached her. Mo wanted to retreat, but she wasn't willing. If she didn't retreat, she couldn't suppress him with her aura. After a moment of hesitation, his hand fell on her shoulder. Why are you like a little hedgehog? Are you afraid of me? Afraid of him? Mo curled her lips into a smile. You think too much. Just as she was about to rudely slap his hand away, his hand moved automatically. Like magic, he held out a bouquet of flowers. This is for you. How about it as my apology? Chapter 1676. Oh God, his father sent her flowers again. How obsessed was his father to be with flowers? He kept getting thrown away, and he kept getting sent away. He was so strong. Shin Yinma could not bear to look anymore, so he turned his head away. Mo looked at the flowers in front of her. The light blue buds were slightly transparent, and there seemed to be a fluorescent glow on the buds. It was a species that she had never seen before. How many of the flowers that she had thrown away were the ones that she had seen before? Every time she saw these flowers, she had an illusion that she did not know enough about plants. She was very knowledgeable about flowers and plants. However, compared to the flowers that he had sent her, she felt that she was very naive. To be honest, this bouquet of flowers was especially beautiful. Moreover, it was very suitable for her. If it was from someone else, she might have accepted it. However, it was from him. She had already habitually wanted to destroy it. Therefore, she smiled and raised her hand to take it. As usual, she wanted to blow all the flowers away in one breath. However, he had already said, "This is the last bouquet of flowers that I have sent you. Can you let it bloom a little longer?" The last bouquet. It seemed that he finally realized that flowers could not move her, so he would not send her any more in the future. At least he knew what was good for him. Mo looked at him and then looked at the flowers in her hand. She smiled faintly. Okay, I will let it bloom a little longer. She began to pull the petals one by one. When she pulled them into her palm, she gently blew them away. She watched the petals fly away. Therefore, when one petal flew away, she pulled another one. Shin Yinma was speechless. Mother, you are awesome. Shinjioli's eyes flickered slightly. Perhaps, he had been beaten up too many times, so he was no longer angry. He even raised his hand and gently rubbed her hair. This is a good idea. You can take your time to tear it. Before Mo could dodge, he had already stepped back a few steps away from her. He smiled and watched her tear the petals. Mo was speechless. She originally did this to make him angry, but unexpectedly, it did not make him angry. Instead, she felt that it was a little silly to tear the petals one by one. Therefore, after a while, she stopped. Then, she opened her mouth and blew at the stamen. Suddenly, the petals flew like rain, and the blue petals fell like stars. Not only that, but there was also a lot of pollen in the stamen. When she blew, the pollen wafted out and inevitably inhaled into her nose. The fragrance of the flowers was intoxicating and faint, but it actually made her feel refreshed. It felt as if she had eaten a ginseng fruit. Even the blood in her body suddenly became lively and flowed rapidly in her body. Her qi and blood were flowing too fast. Before she could ask Shinjioli what he was up to, she subconsciously took a step back and wanted to meditate. Suddenly, the light in front of her eyes dimmed, and her lips felt warm. Someone had suddenly sucked on them. She was fighting against her bloodline that was about to go berserk. She never thought that he would take this opportunity to kiss her. With a loud bang in her head, he had already skillfully pried open her teeth and blew into her mouth. The qi was extremely clear, and before she could react, it had already entered her stomach. Bastard, he actually kissed her in front of the child. Mo was enraged and sent a palm strike towards him. If she did not beat him up, he would not know why the flowers were so red. However, this time, Shinjioli was obviously prepared. Just as her palm was about to hit him, it was directly caught by him. Then, he blew a second breath into her mouth. This time, the qi was scorching hot, and it went directly into her throat. Just like the first breath, it went straight into her stomach. Chapter 1677. All of this happened in the blink of an eye. Coupled with the fact that Amo's blood and qi were surging too violently, her brain was slightly sluggish. By the time she had fully reacted and was about to use her devil arts to attack him, he had already let go of her and retreated a few steps. Mo was fuming with rage. Her pretty face turned cold. Bastard! She flipped her palms, and a red light flew out like lightning. It exploded in the air and turned into countless sharp blades. Like a net, it covered Shinjioli's head. Mother! Little Nyenma screamed. He was so scared that his throat was about to break. Mo's heart tightened, and she subconsciously retracted her magical power. Don't retract it. Shinjioli suddenly slammed his palm toward her. The white light was blazing and whistling toward her. Was he crazy? Mo was furious. She simply used all her strength and slammed toward Shinjioli. Shinjioli waved his sleeves and protected Shin Nyenma, who was standing next to him, with a wizardry barrier. Then, he used his palm to catch Amo's attack. The most important thing in a battle between masters was to be distracted. With such a slight delay, his body was hit by the red light. His face turned a little pale, but he did not retreat. Instead, he moved forward and circled around Mo as if he was tempting her to attack. Mo's brain was buzzing, and there seemed to be something screaming and roaring in her head. When she was playing with Shin Nyenma, she was in a peaceful mood. Her pair of eyes unknowingly turned black, but now her eyes were completely red, redder than the setting sun. Her mind was blank, and only inexplicable thoughts of killing were raging in her chest. She seemed to have gone crazy. She slammed her palms one after another without paying attention to whether she hit the target or not. Strangely, the more she slammed her palms with all her strength, the more comfortable the blood in her body was. It was as if the devil in her body was finally released and finally had a chance to explode. Finally, she gradually slowed down, as if the devil was finally released. Her mind gradually cleared up. When reason finally crept back into her brain, she abruptly retracted her palm. Looking at everything around her, she was stunned. The grassland was gone, and the purple bamboo forest in the distance looked as if it had been swept by a typhoon, collapsing to the ground. The lush tree in the middle of the grassland was also gone, leaving only a bottomless pit in its place. Even some of the pavilions and buildings in the distance were completely destroyed. It collapsed all over the ground. As far as the eye could see, everything seemed to have been swept away by a typhoon of more than 10 magnitude, and no one could see their original appearance anymore. This destructive power, she subconsciously looked around, but all she could see were broken walls, broken branches, and broken leaves. She couldn't see anyone else at all. Where was Shinjuli? Where was Nianma? Could it have been destroyed by her demonic nature? Mo's heart was beating wildly. She didn't know if it was because she was exhausted or because she was nervous, but her fingers were trembling in her sleeves. Her figure flashed, and she couldn't help but look around. In the deep pit, under the fallen purple bamboo, among the broken walls, she had searched all the places where people could be hidden, but she couldn't find any trace of the father and son. Could it be? Shinjuli was the Divine Lord. How could he be so weak? She was getting more and more nervous, and her legs began to weaken. She stood at the edge of the deep pit and was about to jump into the pit to look for him. Suddenly, someone gently patted her shoulder. "Are you looking for me?" The voice was as cold as usual. Mo suddenly turned around and looked at the person who was standing behind her. Chapter 1678. Shinjuli was standing behind her, an arm's length away from her. He did not seem to be injured. His white robe was still dazzling, and his demeanor was still elegant. However, his face was slightly pale. Shin Nianma was sitting in the wizardry barrier behind him. He looked confused as if he had just woken up. He looked at her and smiled. His voice was gentle and teasing. "Are you worried about me?" Mo finally felt relieved. Hearing his words, she rubbed her eyebrows and said coldly, "I am worried about Nianma. Fortunately, he is fine. He will be fine with me protecting him." Shinjuli finally opened the wizardry barrier and let the little guy out. Shin Nianma cried as soon as he landed. "Mother, father, please don't fight. I am scared." Mo regretted it. What was wrong with her just now? It was like an active volcano that had erupted. In the beginning, she wanted to give him a slap to teach him a lesson for his lecherous behavior. Later, she did not know what happened. She could not control herself. "Nianma, your mother and I did not fight. We were just learning from each other." Shinjuli carried his son and comforted him. But mother was so fierce just now. Shin Nianma was frightened. Shinjuli was a little regretful. When he led Mo to attack, her attack was too fierce. He did not seal little Nianma's 5 senses in time and let him see something. Mo seemed to be possessed by a demon. She was surrounded by a red light. She used all her strength in every attack, so he had to try his best to resist and guide her. "Nianma, come here. Let me see if I hurt you." Ning Xuema looked at her son's pale face and felt even more regretful. She wanted to carry him over to have a look. Little Nianma shrank into Shinjuli's arms and subconsciously avoided her hand. There was a flash of fear in his eyes as he looked at her. Mo was shocked by his expression. It was as if she was pricked by a needle. She slowly withdrew her hand. Then she looked up at Shinjuli and asked, "What did you do to me just now?" Her condition just now was obviously abnormal. It seemed to have something to do with his flower and the 2 breaths. Now, her blood was no longer boiling, but she felt extremely tired all over, as if she had just finished running a marathon. "To treat your chronic illness." Shinjuli smiled faintly. "How do you feel now?" Mo's heart skipped a beat. How did he know she had a chronic illness? She raised her eyebrows and looked at him. What chronic illness do I have? Does not age count? Shinjuli replied. Mo was speechless. She really couldn't grow up. She had looked like this when she first woke up on this continent. 3 years later, she was still the same. Her height and appearance were still that of a lowly. However, she didn't really care about her appearance. Whether she was a lowly or a mature woman, it made no difference to her. What does that have to do with you? It has a lot to do with this. Shinjuli looked at her from head to toe. He even paused for a moment at her underdeveloped chest. His gaze was too sharp. It was as if he was a pervert. Mo's ears turned red. If little Nianma was not here, she would have called him a pervert. She did not want to face him anymore, so she turned and walked away. Shuema, do you really not like me anymore? He suddenly asked behind her. Mo paused for a moment and finally turned around. She looked at him sincerely. Divine Lord, have we broken off the engagement? Chapter 1679. Mo paused for a moment and finally turned around to look at him sincerely. Divine Lord, have we broken off the engagement? Yes. That's it. There's no engagement between us. I really don't have any feelings for you. In the future, you'll go your own way, and I'll go mine. I really don't think there's any need for me to answer your question just now. Also, I am not Shuema. I am Mo. Shinjuli looked down and smiled. Well, take care. He did not intend to ask her to stay. Mo then turned around and left. She was about to turn around the corner. Mother. Shin Nianma could not help but call out from behind. Mo's footsteps paused for a moment, but he didn't look back. His figure gradually disappeared into the purple bamboo forest, and his shadow could no longer be seen. Shin Nianma cried out loud. Father, does mother not want us anymore? Shinjuli's face was pale. He rubbed his hand on his head. Don't worry. Your mother will not abandon you. His father had never lied to him. Naturally, he would not this time. Shin Nianma was finally relieved. His stomach was full of hunger. He pursed his lips. Father, I am hungry. Shinjuli raised his sleeve, and a table appeared on the ground. There were a few dishes and a few pastries on the table. It looked very sumptuous. The tempting fragrance of the food rushed into his nose. Shin Nianma immediately cheered and jumped down from the ground to the table. Wow, there are so many delicious food. He sat there and wolfed down the food. These are all things that mother likes to eat. Father, you should have asked mother to stay for a meal just now. She will be happy to see these. Shin Nianma's little mouth was full, and he felt a little regretful. Shinjuli sat at the side and watched his son eat. He did not speak. He also did not move. After a while, Shin Nianma was finally full. As a child, he was full of energy. He pulled Shinjuli's hand and asked him to bring him around. Shinjuli patted his head and said, Nianma, you will be a senior immortal in the future. A senior immortal should be independent. It is not right for you to always need your parents to follow you. Be good and go play by yourself. I will test you on your homework later. Her words made Shin Nianma puff out his chest. Alright, I will go and play by myself. He then ran away. Shinjuli glanced at Cheong-chi who had just returned. Cheong-chi shuddered and immediately followed little Nianma. As soon as Shin Nianma left, Shinjuli's body swayed slightly and almost fell to the ground. He took advantage of the situation and fell to the ground. Blood seeped out from the corner of his mouth and his face became as white as snow. Although he had resolved most of Mo's crazy attack, he was still injured. His blood was boiling, and he almost could not hold on. He sat there and meditated. The wind blew his robe, as if he would disappear at any time. When Imo returned to Mo Palace, Shui Lan and General Manager He Mu were already impatient. When they saw her return, they were relieved. Unexpectedly, Shui Lan was still wearing that pink robe. If other men were to wear this robe, it would make others feel terrified. But when he wore this robe, it was as exquisite as an ink painting, even more beautiful and dazzling than peach blossoms. Momo, are we still going on with the wedding? Shui Lan followed her and smiled enchantingly. Mo waved her hand and said, "You can leave now." She had successfully broken off the engagement, so there was no need for her to act. Chapter 1680. Shui Lan's bewitching peach blossom eyes sparkled. Momo, actually, I don't mind making it real. I do mind. Mo answered straightforwardly and yawned lazily. Shui Lan, you can return to your demon clan. Don't worry, I'll keep my promise to you. She was really tired after a day of torment. She just wanted to have a good sleep and didn't want to deal with anyone else. Shui Lan's eyes flickered slightly. He paused and sighed softly. Okay. Momo, can I still come to see you in the future? Let's leave it to fate. Mo yawned again and turned to go back inside. Looking at her back, Shui Lan was lost in thought for a moment. He knew that she was disgusted with the matters of love and love. Therefore, this time, he couldn't pester her like before. He had to take it slow. Mo returned to her bedroom and didn't think about anything. She slept soundly for a long time. She even had a dream. In the dream, there were gusts of wind, dense fog, mountains collapsed, and rivers flowed backward. She and a man in white stood opposite each other. You and I love each other, so we're getting rid of evil for the people. A woman's voice floated in the air. She seemed to be joking. Marry me. Or should I marry you? In your dreams. A cold voice pierced through the clouds. Along with these two words, a sword with flowing light flew in all directions. Mo shivered and woke up from her dream. She rubbed her forehead. She could still remember most of the scene in her dream, but she couldn't remember the appearance of the man in white. It seemed to be very handsome. She could still remember that voice. It seemed to be Shinjili. Could it be that her dream was a scene from tens of thousands of years ago? She sat there and thought for a long time. Besides this scene, she couldn't remember anything else. In her dream, Shinjili really didn't show any mercy to her. After she woke up, she seemed to be able to feel the cold and murderous intent. She yawned and patted her small mouth. It seemed like the rumors were true. She and he were really enemies tens of thousands of years ago. No wonder she felt that he was an eyesore when she saw him this time. After being engaged to him, she felt as if she was sitting on pins and needles. She thought of ways to break off this engagement. So this was the reason. She got up to wash her face and rinse her mouth. As she was combing her hair, she inadvertently looked into the bronze mirror and was suddenly stunned. In the mirror appeared a woman in her late 20s. She had large eyes, a small mouth, red lips, and white teeth. Her beauty was unparalleled. Her appearance was still the same as before, but she had grown quite a bit. She sat there and looked at the mirror for a moment. She raised her hand and touched her face. The woman in the mirror also raised her hand and touched her face. He had actually grown up. He grew up overnight. She used to look like she was 13 or 14 years old, but now she looked like she was 17 or 18 years old. She was like a flower that was about to bloom. It seemed that Shinjili was telling the truth when he said that he wanted to treat her chronic illness. The flowers he gave her and the forced kiss at the end were all for this. She looked at herself in the mirror again and looked at her forehead. There was a cloud-shaped cinnabar mole on her forehead. It was very delicate and beautiful, adding to her beauty. She walked out of the hall. Head steward Himu was waiting outside. When he saw her like this, he was stunned. Devil. Devil Master. Ah, Emo smiled, a smile that could topple cities. She turned in a circle. How is it? Am I beautiful? Head steward Himu was so stunned that he almost stuttered. Beautiful. Beautiful. She was really too beautiful. He had never seen a woman more beautiful than the Devil Master. Chapter 1681. She was too pleasing to the eye. Manager Himu had never seen a woman more beautiful than the Devil Master. Especially her temperament. She was pure yet enchanting, enchanting yet charming. She had the innocence of a child yet the naivety of a young girl. They were clearly contradictory characteristics, but when they were concentrated on her, they were incomparably harmonious. Manager Himu almost couldn't move his eyes away. Although the original Mo also smiled, there was always an indescribable gloominess around her that made people feel an inexplicable sense of oppression when they were by her side. Now, however, that shadow was gone. She even had a bit of sunshine to her. Manager Himu finally remembered his mission. Devil Master, the courtyard next door, should we clear it out? That person was a supreme god. He definitely wouldn't come back. The Devil Master did not find him pleasing to the eye. With that courtyard there, it was inevitable that he would be displeased. Mo's gaze swept over the courtyard. Her vision blurred, and she seemed to see him floating over. When she rubbed her eyes again, that person disappeared again. She was actually seeing things. He had been living there for the past few days. Every time she opened her eyes, she would see him. It had actually become a habit. It wasn't strange that she was seeing things. She felt inexplicably anxious. She waved her hand. I'll take care of it. You don't have to worry about it. Head steward Himu nodded and left. Mo had nothing to do, so she strolled around the courtyard next door. She paused at the door for a moment, then walked into his room. She rarely came here. Too many things had happened the last time she was here. She didn't have time to see the layout. Now that she had the time and the mood, she casually glanced around. The layout of the room was low-key yet grand. Whether it was the screen with the fox painting or the small jade ornaments on the table, all of them showed the owner's taste. His taste and taste were extraordinarily elegant. She vaguely felt that the layout here was familiar. Even the gums behind the screen looked familiar. It was as if she had lived in a place like this before. She walked over and sat on the gums. In a daze, she seemed to see a man and a woman rolling on the gums and kissing. The kiss was so passionate that she almost wanted to go to bed. Hey, Guru. You still haven't given me an explanation. I don't want to have an unclear relationship with you. The woman finally pushed the man away. Shiwama, hurry up and level up. The man's voice was hoarse, as if he was holding something back. Finally, he let go of the woman turned around and sat up. Her face was as red as rouge. All right. You should leave quickly. My small temple can't accommodate a big bodhisattva like you. Then how about you go to my main hall? My temple is big enough to accommodate you. Go to your main hall. Alright, give me a corresponding position. The temple is so big, it shouldn't be a problem for me to sit next to you, right? The woman giggled, almost hanging on the man's arm. The intimacy between them was obvious. It depends on your performance. The man replied to her and raised his hand to rub her head. I will definitely rise to level 8 within 2 years. The woman was full of confidence. Let's wait and see. Mo's heart skipped a beat. The hand that was stroking the gums trembled, and the illusion disappeared. The man just now should be Shinjioli, and the woman looked like herself. She subconsciously touched her face again. That woman's appearance was almost exactly the same as her current appearance. You're tuning into the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.